Hello and welcome to Open Mic, the live stream that is all about songwriting and music production from home. I am Reagan and I am joined by Joseph. How's it going?
Good.
Doing well
Glad
this
we
evening?
could make this first one work out ever since we talked about the idea probably like a month ago now.
Yeah.
It's been a
So
little while.
so the plan is to do one of these every month or so. So we'll see how this goes. So if you have any questions, go ahead and drop those in the chat at any time. And we'll get into talking about songwriting and music production and answer any questions you have. And I actually saw we already got a super chat before we even went live. I didn't even know that was possible, so that's awesome. By the Lover's Key. So thank you so much for that. And their question is: any synthwave tutorials that demonstrate how to incorporate live recorded drumming layered with triggered samples? That's a really good question. I'm not off the top of my head. I don't know of any tutorials, but this is something that is pretty common to do. I know we did it when I was working in a studio when I was learning music production. So some things to keep in mind is you kind of want to find samples that kind of fit the same tone of what we recorded. And so you want to keep in mind that aspect, the timbre, but also the space, right? Because the drum room, whatever drum room you're recording in, if you are layering that with like a really dry sample, it can sound a little weird. So maybe try to match the room tone with that. A big thing is also making sure that it's not out of phase. So when you put in the sample, make sure that the waveforms, the peaks and the troughs match the recorded drum notes, so that you're not creating a flanging kind of sound. You might also want to potentially tune your sample if it's not really in the same kind of character. If you're still having troubles with that, you can use like a plugin to tune it. And then the last tip I would give on that would be apply just group bus processing. So you're applying the same processing to the sample as what you're applying to the live recorded drum sound. So it could be like some glue compression, some EQ, so that if it's kind of getting blended together and glued together, so it's almost like the same sound. And that's a really good technique, adding in some samples, right? Especially if you don't have the best drum room that you're recording in, and it's might just sound a little flat. And so having some samples you can layer in can really liven it up, but you still get that natural feel from the live sample. So hopefully that answers your question. If you have any live samples you want to send me, I don't have a live drum kit, so I don't get to work with a lot of live samples that frequently, so, or at least not recently. So if you want to email me, you can send me some and I could see if I could actually make a tutorial for you, if that's something you want. Otherwise, thanks for the awesome question. So with that, what have you been working on? What's been going on lately with you?
And on that, for everybody in the chat, go ahead and drop in whatever you've been working on. Let us know, because we're curious what other, looks like they responded. But yeah, be sure to let us know what else you're working on right now, because hopefully we're all working on stuff, whether that's songwriting wise or music production wise. For me, I know I'm working on all of the above right now. I am three main things. One is lyrics for a very specific song called The Wanderer, and even more specific, I'm working on the second verse lyrics. The first verse, I think I finally have exactly more or less where I want it. So I'm working on the second verse lyrics for that. Also working on recording vocals is the main thing, which is a giant pain. I feel like it would be, recording vocals would be so much easier if you had somebody to be your trusty producer, because otherwise it's so hard to be like to not just be in a zone of like, oh, I can do better. But it's like at some point you have to just say this is good. But sometimes it's hard to even know what's good, just because that sounds silly, right? You know, if you're on pitch generally, you know, all that stuff. You know if it's bad, but there's a difference between knowing if something's bad and knowing like that's the take. So yeah, so, and then also re-recording some I
think you froze. I know we've been having some troubles with that recently, so hopefully we get Joseph back here. I'm just going to pull up the Lover's Key response here. So was only planning on using the overheads and a high pass filtering the heck out of it. The phase aligning with MIDI is a pain in Yeah. So yeah, if you're using a MIDI,
guitars from.
oh, Joseph's back.
Yay!
You cut out for a
That
second
happened
there.
already.
Yep.
Yeah. What's weird is that I always can hear the other person still and see the other person when I'm cut out.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's this weird, like, awkward 10-second gap where, like, I heard you start to read the comment, but yeah.
All right. Well, I'll just wrap this up real quick.
Yeah. Go for it.
So yeah, so if you're using MIDI and I would actually just bounce that track in place so it becomes audio, because yeah, you can't really line up a MIDI sample with an actual audio sample. So I would just bounce it in place so that it's audio and you can line up so that the phase isn't a problem. Um, so yeah, so if you're just going for overheads, then that's probably a little bit easier, because those aren't as complex. There's not really as many frequencies going on with overheads. You just got the high ends there. So I just kind of find something that maybe is like a similar, right? Because there's still a lot of variance in overhead tones depending on the type of drum kit you're using. So yeah, look for maybe a similar type sample and just kind of try to match the room sound of that, and then apply group processing to the sample and the live recorded. We're getting lots of comments already flooding in, but I'll let you wrap up what you're saying.
Yeah, and then I'll read Eric's 2 chats, and then we can move on to GC after that. But yeah, so unfortunately, I feel like this gets boring, so I don't want to go into details. But basically, we routed drums MIDI mapping a long time ago differently for the drum kit we had and Superior Drummer 2. And I don't have Superior Drummer 2. I have Superior Drummer 3. This was my old band like 10 years ago. So I'm finally now revisiting what was going to be the second album and taking some of those songs I already reworked for my solo stuff that will be in the EP that I'm recording vocals for. But some of it is like harder rock stuff that is just needs to be a different act than me. So long story short, I'm trying to figure out how to figure out what the drum mapping was to actually make it correct again, which is slightly irritating because drums is, I feel like as a guitarist, it sort of comes with, to a degree, knowledge of like bass, and if you're a pianist, you have knowledge of pretty much anything that has like pitch, basically. It's similar enough that you kind of get it inherently in a way that you don't with like drums, because drums is kind of its own thing. So that's been kind of a frustrating thing, but that is more or less what I've been working on. So Eric was talking about staying focused and disciplined, which is always at the very beginning of it can be difficult and also is the most important thing. Just starting out learning music in general, but specifically I'm trying to learn to solo over chord changes on guitar, doing some arpeggio drills. That's been helping. So I don't want to assume what you do and don't know, but you say just starting out learning music in general. So I will say something that maybe you already know, but start with keys, right? So if your chord progression is in you're a guitarist, so we'll say G major, because statistically that's probably the most likely. So if your chord progression is in G major, just staying in the G major scale or G pentatonic or whatever, major or pentatonic, one of those two, assuming that we're in the key of G major again here. Staying with that, pretty much anything will work. And then just as a side tip, I go over this in my course in more detail, but at a high level, basically, whenever you're improvising, whether it's melodically or with a guitar solo, which is a form of melody, the easy thing to do is at almost any given time, if you land on a note and it sounds wrong with the chord, assuming that you are playing notes only in the key, almost always, if you just go up by one more note or down by one more note within the key, you will then have a note that it sounds right. And basically the reason for that, I don't want to go too deep into this, but basically if you think about it, all of your major and minor keys have 7 notes, right? And then all your triads, which are most chords, major and minor chords, are 3 notes that are separated by thirds. So if we just think by number, your chord might be, say, 1, 3, and 5 in a scale. So if you play on the guitar the 1, it will just sound right. The 2 will have some tension. It might sound right, and you need to have non-chord tones to have interesting music. So that may be fine. But if it sounds off, it might be because, say, you're on the 2nd scale degree and your chord has the first, third, and fifth scale degree. But anyway, if you just think mathematically, when you're on the 2, you can go up to the 3 or down to the 1. When you're on the 3, you're already on a right note. I'm putting quotes on all of these, but 4, you go up by 1 or down by 1, and you're good. 5, you're already on a right note. 6, you go down, you're good. You go up by 1, maybe not. That would make a 7th for the chord, but then you just go up 1 more, and then you're good. So that's like kind of the only exception. There's like going to be one place where maybe you'd have to go up by 2 notes, but then you only have to go down by 1. Anyway, long story short, know what key you're in and solo in that key, and then go up by, if you're on a note and you're like, that sounds wrong with the chord, just go down by 1 note or up by 1 note in the key, and it probably will then be like, oh, it sounds right now. But, yeah.
It's just crazy listening to stuff like that, because that's like us. When I write solos, I just look at, okay, here's my scale, here's my key, here's what all the notes are, and I just play a bunch of random stuff until something sounds good. So,
oh yeah. I mean,
I could learn,
that is the way to start, right? But
it would probably be a lot more effective if I knew all that. I need to learn all that music theory stuff. And then we have this comment by GC. Just getting back into making tunes recently, so I'm working on relearning some fundamentals that I lost. So yeah, if there's any fundamentals that you have questions about, go ahead and drop those below. So yeah, I know you mentioned. See, I just want to follow up on what you said a little bit.
Yeah.
You said that you've been working on trying to figure out how you know if something is a good take. So I guess what's like preventing you from knowing that your takes are good?
That's a great question. I think there's so many things that go into it. So one, when you're self-producing, it's hard to, I think, objectively listen to something that you just recorded, because not only do you know how it sounds because you're listening to it, but you know how it felt. So I think a part of it is if you know that deep down you were thinking, oh, I don't know if I got that take. Then if you listen to the take and you think, wow, I nailed it, you're like, well, but I felt like I didn't in the moment. So maybe that perspective was right. So I think that's a part of it. A part of it is just a certain level of perfectionism that, like, unfortunately, the reality is that melody is king. I don't think that part's unfortunate necessarily, but and the vocal is front and center, right? You
right, the vocal carries the melody.
Yeah, I mean, the vocal is everything. In most music genres, the vocal is where things live or die, right? So you can hide flaws in other things better than with vocals, which is the weird thing is you can hide flaws with vocals, or sometimes flaws are what make vocals likable. Like all the perfect takes that Chris Lipe talks about this, for anybody out there who knows who Chris Lipe is. But he talks about how, like, when we think of perfect take from all our favorite artists, they're not perfect. Like, if you go and listen to, Don't Stop Believing by Journey or something, you think, oh, Steve Perry nailed it. And yeah, he did. But if then you pitch correct it, you realize, like, actually there's some stuff where, like, he's not right on pitch, or, some rhythmic things. But you don't notice, right? Because that's just the definitive take that you've heard over and over again. So it's kind of hard to, I think, separate out those two things. And then there's always just it's so easy to get into the mode of chasing, well, maybe I can do it better. Maybe I can do it better. Mm-hmm. And I think a part of it is just, like, I haven't spent enough time recording vocals in the last, like, 4 years. So like, I'm not super aware of my current limitations. I am just singing around the house, but that's different than when you record it, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, I know when it feels good to sing, and I'm like, I think that was good when I'm just singing around the house or something. But it's harder to tell, I think, when it's just recording back. I don't know. I think that's your question. I know there's a lot of things in there. I think there's a lot of, like, self scripts that are.
I think it can be helpful to get someone else's feedback too, and just see how does it feel with them, because you do have that bias, and then that perfectionism. Like, a big thing that that's helped me with overcome perfectionism. I mean, some people might say that I'm too imperfect. I don't strive for perfectionism enough. But one thing that can help is just changing your standard of success, and rather than your standard being, perfection, being a really perfect, as perfect as you can be, by having the standard be how many songs have you completed. That's your standards of success, is finishing songs. So you're successful, not when it reaches some mythical threshold of quality, because everything can always be better, but when you finish the song, and then you can feel successful. That's what I found is helpful.
Yeah, I think a part of it too, though, is just like the mental. So for the album I did with my band back in the day, we screwed up recording vocals. So beyond the fact that we had to record in a dorm room and we recorded in a closet and close it, but beyond all that, right? We actually did a decent job on that front. But I was too close to the mic because we were idiots.
Did you get clipping or what?
No, just like the too much
Dark?
low end.
Yeah, too low end.
So that was one issue. Yeah. Another is we did too many takes, and then we just kind of gave it to the guy who did the mixing, and it's like he got 50 takes. Like we're not going to pay him to comp through all those.
Yeah.
Whereas we would have been better off just
hours and hours.
Yeah.
I hate comping vocals.
Yeah, comping vocals is the worst. I love the Chris Lipe method of where you just like basically you sing a phrase over and over until you get it, and then you go to the next phrase and you sing it over and over until you get it. And it's not necessarily phrase by phrase, but I like that method way better, which I'm utilizing this time. Thank you, Chris Lipe. Not that he knows who I am, because he's way bigger than than us combined times like 20. But for anybody who wants to record vocals, Chris Lipe, as far as I'm concerned, is the gold standard out there. So go check him out specifically for just vocal stuff. But yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those. It's so that's like stuck in my head of like I don't want to do that again. Where like I know my best performances didn't even make the album. Like they just got buried somewhere, and that is just like, and I can hear it in the songs, which is a part of why half of them are not currently released, or they're I took them off. Also because I wrote the songs in high school, so that's an element. But yeah. So GC followed up with, I'm mostly focusing on sound design, DAW stuff, and coming up with good melodies. Good melodies is a thing I've seen come up a lot recently. I've had a lot of people ask about that, an email about that, for sure. Yeah, good melodies is such an interesting... It's so difficult to even talk about good melodies, because anytime you give any opinion, it's like somebody will be like, what about this? It's like, well, okay. There are always general.
We lost you again. That sounded like it was about to be good. All right, you're coming back. I hear you. Oh, you're back. All right.
Goodness. My internet company, I need to call them tomorrow. But yeah, melody is such an interesting thing. Like, and no matter what you say, you're always going to tick somebody off. But like, I would say GC just on that. I know you're not necessarily asking a question, but something I've found is like, don't take for granted what instrument you write your melodies with. Because I found for me, I write better melodies on a keyboard than I do with my own voice. Part of that's probably because I did piano since I was way younger than I really started singing. So that's maybe a part of it. But I also just think that like as a singer, we default to what's comfortable, and we're so used to locking on pitch that we tend to improvise safe melodies with our voice. Whereas with a keyboard, you can visualize melodies better. But I hear the key to coming up with a good melody is to write 299 bad ones. Yeah, I mean that does not hurt. That does not hurt. Also, I want to touch on this. Paul said the Chris Lipe method has changed my workflow, which is, yeah, Chris Lipe is my guy right now, because I think he saved me a ton of pain. I always hate comping vocals. His course is just really, really good. I got his course a while ago, and I'm finally like actually watching it and using it. Just because I wasn't recording vocals when I bought it, but I knew I would want to know.
Yeah, I think only like 5% of people who buy courses actually like go through them and implement what's in the course. So
yeah, I would say it's sad, but I've done that like more than once. It's usually with somebody that I trust enough that like I know that someday when I need it, or when I'm more likely to, like I just know I have it.
Right.
For the most part, I've been pretty good about going through courses, but there's been a few where it's like, oh, I probably shouldn't have jumped into that until I knew I was ready to actually do it. Which is sad too, because like courses are the best way to get great results. Like I watch Chris Felipe videos. I'll use him as an example just because we're talking about him already. But like his videos are super helpful, but you get a whole system when you buy the course, right? So it's actually like I can sit down
Yeah, I
and be
think
like,
it's
okay, I'm
you
recording
just don't
vocals. I
have
need to
the
do this, this,
accountability.
this. Yeah, that too. Yeah, because when you pay the money, you're like, well, now I got to do it theoretically. But yeah, and also with melodies, yeah, coming up with bad ones can help. I also find like trying to one up your melodies to a certain degree is something that's helpful, because I think too often we can just land on a melody and we're like, oh, that's okay, that's good enough, and then we move on. It's like, well, should we settle for good enough with melody if melody is the most important part of a song? And I've done that too, right? I mean, even the EP that's coming out, one of the songs is like 10 years old, and as I'm recording it, it's like, well, I really like the melody in the chorus, but the verse melody is like, a part of me just wants to rewrite it, but I'm like, nope, too late. Too late. It's a 10-year-old song, it'll be fine. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this might not be the best idea, but since I don't play an instrument, when I write melodies, I'll like try and play something on my keyboard, and then I'll like go in and just experiment drawing in notes or moving notes around, and then a lot of times I'll find something cool that way. Just like that's like my rough draft, and I edit the melody, find something different, or especially like different instrument, and it's like you can like make it more interesting, like especially if you're using like a synth type lead. If you're like, you could have like certain notes, you turn the portamento up, get some glide. I like to use the pitch wheel and the modulation wheel. I'll like go back and go over it and like add vibrato to certain notes, like usually the longer held out notes, and I like add a little like pitch frill or like twirl on some notes. And so that's another way to like, it's not really changing the melody, the notes are the same, but it's like adding extra character to it. Also different effects. This is kind of getting to production, but you can have automation, you can have effects changing over time, so you're adding movement to it. Something I've done that's like really cool is even like using like bit crushing and like changing how much it's being bit crushed over time, or saturation, how much distortion's like coming and going, or just reverb, delay, like having stuff changing on it can make it, even if it's simple, the notes are simple, like you can do production techniques to your melody to make it sound more interesting as well.
Something you said in there that I think is really important. You mentioned the word edit, and forgive me for anybody who listens to the podcast and they've heard this recently or are about to hear this in upcoming podcast. I don't remember if it's one that already came out or is about to, but editing melody is one of those things that like I think people are missing out if they're not doing it, because there's so many times that I had a melody that was like, okay, I think that's pretty good. But then when I went into the piano, so I record it using my keyboard with MIDI, right? And then I take the MIDI and edit it. I just try. I'm like, what if I move one note up by a semitone or down by a whole step, whatever the right note in key is. And oftentimes that's where you'll take a melody from like, oh, this is pretty good, to like, oh, okay. Because sometimes it's just like in a phrase, you're one note off, right? Just one note, moving a little bit, being a little shorter, being a little longer, changing the rhythm up a little bit. So just taking the time to like edit a melody, which I think you as a producer have an advantage there, whereas people who like aren't producing their songs at all are kind of at a disadvantage, because there's no like natural way to do that if you're not producing the song.
Yeah, if you're recording audio, you can't change.
Yeah. Or if you're just doing the classic, like you're sitting with a guitar and you're improvising with your voice, like how do you can like mentally try to tell yourself, okay, change up how I sing the melody just a little bit. And depending on how good you are, that might work great, right? But that's just more difficult than... Also, I think there's something to be said for sometimes if you're performing a melody, you're going to be biased towards how it feels, which I don't think should be discounted, but there's something to be said for when, in your case, right? So you record it or you edit it and you kind of get it tight. All you're doing is listening. So you're judging it as a listener, not as a how good did it feel to sing this. And I think that how good something feels to sing it is not something to like ignore, but ultimately it matters how it sounds, not how it feels. So I think there's also an advantage to recording it and editing it for that reason.
That's a good question by Casey Sheehan. When you guys come up with melodies, do you automatically assign them to a chorus melody first, or will you use it for a verse, post-chorus, etc.? For me, I usually create the rhythm elements first, so I'll have the chords and the drums and the bass, and then I go and write my melodies over top of that. So that kind of dictates the melody. For me, I'm a little bit more. I think this is probably just stylistic, but I try. I probably try to keep my the notes in my melody closer together. I probably change this up though, but a lot of times in my verses, I'll keep things a little bit more simple, and then maybe in the chorus, I might start out that way, but then I'll try going up the scale more or move around a little bit more just to be a little bit more interesting. And kind of emphasize the chorus there, but I'm sure I do it the reverse order too. That's kind of my thought process when I go about starting melodies.
Yeah. This is a great question. So to go off of what you said, I also tend to start with something harmonically. Usually I start with something that some people call an engine, I think, which is basically find something that can drive your song that's awesome, whether that's a sick guitar riff or a piano part that you think is really memorable and interesting. Think about like, I don't know, Clocks by Coldplay. To me is like the epitome of that. It's very obvious to me that Chris Martin sat down, came up with that piano riff, and they're like, oh, let's build a song off of this. That's a really pretty, interesting riff. And then the whole song kind of comes from that. So the foundation is cool, and then it's easier to build a great song off of it. So usually it starts with harmony with me as well. So do you automatically assign them to a chorus melody first? The answer to that is no, because I'm writing the melody to the specific part of the song that I've already written the harmony for most of the time. But sometimes that doesn't happen. And then off of what Reagan said, often the time it's a feel thing. So let's say you are writing melody first. To me, it's going to come from, does this feel more intimate, or does it feel more grandiose? Does it feel very hook driven? So in your examples, you gave chorus, post-chorus, and verse. So to me, this is overly simplistic, right? So I already know there's going to be somebody in the hate comments like, oh, it depends. Like, yes, of course it depends. But if I were to be overly general, what Reagan said is a great point about, I would use the word conversational. Verses tend to be more conversational. Like when I'm talking right now, I go up a little, I go down a little, right? But choruses tend to be more extreme. Wow. It's like a stage actor, right? Where there's like these big changes. And then post choruses tend to be very hook driven, like short phrases that are just repeated over and over. It's usually not like a full melody, right? It's usually kind of like a call answer pattern, or one line of the song sung four times in a row.
The song title usually.
Yeah. So that tends to be more hook driven. And I guess like sometimes people ask the difference. Hello, Chad. How's it going, man?
Good to hear from you.
Yeah. Totally lost my train of thought. But I'm just so floored by being called this stuff. I just
the post chorus.
But yeah, so the post chorus is obviously it depends, but I like to think of like hook versus a fully fledged melody. So when I say like a hook like melody versus a fully fledged melody, to me it's kind of the difference between a theme and a motif in a soundtrack. So like Darth Vader has a whole theme, right? The Imperial March. And that's like a fully fledged melody that is like basically call, answer, different call, different answer. And then it has the Vader is just the da, 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 da. And then you can be done. You don't even have to finish that phrase, right? Boom.
Right.
So that's
that's like, really cool how they use that you mentioned, because like even like they play it in different ways, like depending on the mood. Like if it's a really sad part, like there'll be just like bells playing it or something.
Yeah, or they change like the
Well,
register it's in like
yeah.
higher. Like for example, not to get too deep into Star Wars, but in Episode 6 when he's dying, spoiler alert, but he's turned back to the light. It's like this high whistle kind of sound.
Yeah,
It's kind
that's
of
what I was
like,
thinking of.
yeah, it's kind of like, not to go too into John Williams and Star Wars, but some people don't realize that the celebration song at the end of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace,
I've always
is
liked that song.
actually the exact same. The melody is exactly the same as Sidious's theme, the Emperor's theme,
Hmm.
to indicate that, yeah, it seems like the good guys won,
Wow,
but
that's pretty
really
genius.
this is falling exactly into the Emperor's plan. But because of the way that rhythmically, it's made more happy and jumpy and all that, people don't even notice that.
Yeah, that makes me think
yeah.
of I'm not sure if you're familiar with Daniel Thrasher.
Yeah.
He's a music comedy
Yeah.
YouTuber,
Has
and
anybody ever said no to that? I feel like he's everywhere.
I don't know.
Now he has
Well,
like the BetterHelp.
well, not
He's
to
even
sound
the
like a
BetterHelp guy.
hipster, but I followed him back when he was like before he had like millions of followers. So I used to say that no one would know who he was. But
Yeah.
he does the videos that's like
Uh-huh.
trying to write an original song, but he
Yep.
keeps creating other songs, and you can hear how he can play like really well-known songs, so he plays them in a very unique way. You can't even
Yeah.
really tell that it's a
Yeah.
popular song that's already been released. So that's kind of interesting how you can change stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, even just little things, like sometimes I'll spend time on not taking for, if I come up with a piano riff, I'll be like, maybe I should try this an octave up or an octave down. And sometimes I lose like a decent amount of time on like, it changes the sound. It's the exact same key, same everything. But just having that octave difference can kind of change the feel a little bit.
Yeah, or you inverting notes. That's a big
Oh,
thing.
for
You do a lot
sure.
with. Yeah. That
For
can change things
sure.
a lot.
Yeah, just in general, changing the bass part while keeping the chords the same is, I'm starting to become convinced that the bass part is much, much more important than the chord in the vast majority of music. I know that sounds like I could like see the eyebrows raising, but like just as an example, a one chord tends to sound very resolved, right? So I mean that's why at the end of a song, oftentimes they'll just be like, and one, and you're like, song's over. We all feel it, even if we don't know how they do that. It's a one chord, but you can totally change the feel of it just by having it be an inversion. Put the third in the bass, put the fifth in the bass, immediately sounds different. So I did a video. Yeah, see, even Chad agrees with me. So you there's two of us now. But yes, thank you, Chad. But so like also just as a thing, Chad someday, you all should come back because Chad someday will probably be on this as well. We've already talked about having guests on, but for the first time we're like, maybe we should stick with with the two of us, just so it's not chaos. But yeah, so just changing up the note that's in the bass is just huge. I did a video recently on a simple way to like make pre-choruses to like make your pre-choruses better, and spoiler alert, the answer was just don't use the one chord. Which in a lot of pre-choruses, that's how they do it. I mean, there's more to it, obviously, but like that's an easy hack, if you will, to make it sound like it's a pre-chorus and not the chorus. But I noticed that some of the songs that do use the one chord, a lot of them I noticed use an inversion of the one chord, where it's like it will be a C major chord, for instance. So we'll say it's in C major, but it has an E in the bass, which immediately changes it to not sound like resolved anymore. So I guess the takeaway from that long rant, everyone, is think about changing up the bass note instead of changing up the chord, and thinking about overemphasizing the bass note and thinking less about the chord, which is not to say the chord isn't important. I just think like sometimes we concentrate too much on, not all voices are created equal. Not all voices are created equal. So if you have four notes in your chord, the top and bottom tend to be the ones you notice the most. I would put bottom as number one, and then the top is number two. And then everything in between is important, but not as foundational as the rest, I guess.
Awesome. Yeah. So yeah, as far as
what have you been working on?
Yeah, what I've been working on. 35 minutes in. Main thing I've been doing is I've been working with clients as an arranger. So I've been hired to like write some songs. So that's kind of the big part of what I've been working on. Trying to finish up my own album that I've been trying to finish for a long time. So gotta get the vocals recorded, get this wrapped up and released, and then actually find some time to actually start doing promotion, because I haven't really been doing even like trying to grow a fan base. So
me neither.
When I get the album done, so we can actually start doing some marketing and start building a fan base. So that's kind of the music wise what I've been working on.
Nice. I know you mentioned one of them was, and I want to ask you about this because I'm genuinely curious, but for one of them, it was someone came to you, they gave you some examples of a backing track that they would like to match the vibe of, and then you came up with basically the whole arrangement for a rap track, right?
Right. So I went to audio engineering school about like 40 minutes from where I live now. And so I've kept in touch with my instructor. He owns the studio. It's like an actual commercial recording studio. And so he just reached out to me out of the blue because he had a client come in that wanted to make a more like electronic type sound, which is what I specialize in. So he said, hey, do you want to come in and help write the song? And so I said, sure. So I came in, and so then we had a brief. So we met with the client, and we just like, hey, what are you wanting? What are you looking for? And so then he gave us different songs that he liked from other artists. And he said what he liked about them. It's like, I like the beat, the trap drums, and he liked the more mysterious kind of feel. And then we kind of tried to figure out like what kind of tempo he wanted. So I was just through a series of asking questions to getting to the bottom of what he wanted. And so then I just took that, and then I went back to my studio. I just created the track off of what he said he wanted, and then went from there.
So for the mysterious, when you went back and you ask yourself, okay, how do I make it sound mysterious? What was your mindset? Did you do it more with the sound choices, the arrangement note wise? Because I know both of those can contribute, but I was just curious what how you thought through that.
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to probably write it in like a minor key. Someone wrote it in a minor key.
Sure.
And then he also said he liked like world instruments, and so added in some of those, like some pan flutes. I feel like those are inherently kind of mysterious, especially when you drench them in reverb. So used a decent amount of that, and just different I know I like production techniques that are maybe more like synthwave or like EDM techniques, but applying it to his track to kind of have it be more dark, and then having the filter open up on some of the tracks. So I'll have them cut the high frequencies and have it open up for the chorus.
So low pass filter.
Right. So yeah. So only the low frequencies pass through and the highs are cut. So, and then, different things like that. Different reverb, delay kind of stuff, and then the instruments themselves, I try to find kind of some kind of eerie, kind of haunting kind of sounds, use some kind of like detuning and like pitch warble type effects and sounds to kind of have it be more like off-putting, but in a good way, I guess. So that's kind of how I went. And then so I created it, and then I was co-writing it basically with my instructor, Anthony, who owns the studio. He was going to basically, I did the tops, and he was going to do like the drums on the bottom. So he ended up adding some like rock drums to it because the client said he wanted it to have also kind of a rock feel. But he said it wasn't mysterious enough. So we actually just took the whole track and just
wasn't mysterious.
Just transposed it down to I think I originally wrote it in C minor, and then we transposed it down to A minor.
Okay.
And then for some reason it like changed my one like pluck into these like really weird like Simmons type drums. So I don't know why it did that, but some reason my DAW did that, and it sounded really cool. So that was like a happy accident. And that was the track.
Yeah. Well, so he accepted. So he accepted it when you basically just.
Oh yeah, he really liked it, and so he immediately wanted me to write another one. So I just wrote another one.
That connects really well with what we were talking about earlier. Where like you'd be surprised how little of a difference makes how a little change can make a big difference. That reminds me of a song I was working on recently where it started in F major. It's piano riff driven. And then I figured out based on where the vocal was going, I was like, oh, well, this is too high. So I was like, okay, let's try C major. And luckily, this is something that would be on the third EP, and I have to finish the vocals for the first EP, so I have a lot of time to figure this out. But I'm kind of in a weird spot right now where like maybe something in between is the right answer. You know, maybe try D major, although the way I play it on the keyboard, it just wouldn't. I don't think it would feel quite right. But trying to figure out like it's changed the sound. It went from like more wistful to sounding a little more confident, I feel like. And that's just by a fourth, right? That's not a huge difference. Yours was by a third. So it's amazing, these little differences, how much they can add up. In fact, I think this is a part of the joy for anybody out there who's like a songwriter and is thinking about getting into music production. I would say like the layers to songwriting that you can add by mixing it with production, to me, is one of my favorite parts of the fact that I did a video recently about how now I do almost exclusively what I call producer style songwriting. I won't dive back into what that is, but it's basically producing a song as you write it. It's basically what it is. Just because little things like instrument choice, you mentioned instrument choice, right? So just when you're a songwriter, you're just kind of stuck with, you know, the acoustic guitar sound you have or the piano sound you have. But when you're actually producing the song, you have the advantage of, you know, this part in organ sounds totally different than this part would with flute. Something I compare it to is like, I don't know, if you take My Heart Will Go On by Celine Dion, if you take that flute part away and you make it a violin instead or an electric guitar instead, I'm not saying it ruins the song. I think that song has a lot of great stuff in it outside of that, even ignoring Celine Dion's incredible voice. But the song would be different, you know, like it just would make a difference without that specific Titanic flute. And that's the sort of thing that I feel like sometimes we miss out on as songwriters if we just sit with our guitar or sit with our piano and we never, I'm not saying always, but like if we never try to find a different sound. Once I was stuck with songwriting, I just started using organ sounds because I was like, dude, organ's super underutilized. It's dope. I think because organ has like the regalness. It has like the bigness of electric guitars, right? That power of electric guitars, but it has like the old, you know, feel of a piano, right? Because electric guitars, the trade-off is you get power, but you get power that feels modern. It's kind of like a synth, right? A synth is like the next evolution, I would say, where like music just sounds inherently more modern when you have electric guitars in it compared to if you just have piano and violins and stuff, right? I think we all inherently know that. But then synth is like that next level where it sounds even more modern. Like if you want to take rock and make it more modern sounding, you add synth to it. So the reverse of that to me, it was organ. So literally just by sitting and using organ sounds instead, same keyboard, same everything, but I was hearing organ sounds back. And I came up with like two songs harmonies in like one sitting of 20 minutes, one of which evolved into a whole song just from changing the sound, right? So it's a powerful thing, I think.
Yeah, a big part of my songwriting process is actually erasing, I've found, because a lot of times for the tutorials I make on my channel, I have to like complete the song first and then I go back and say what I did, which probably would be good to like record myself actually writing it. But I find myself like, I'll go 20 minutes explaining, no, I'm going to do this. And then I just delete the whole section. I'm like, well, that's going to take forever to edit. Like I'll like delete an entire, like, I don't like where the verse is going. So let me restart, or I don't like the chorus and I'll restart.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, I never get too attached to any section or even any song. Because when I was getting started, I knew nothing about music theory. I didn't even know what the notes were on a keyboard. Like I didn't know what an A was or a C was. I just started punching keys on the keyboard. I'm like, oh, okay. So like these keys sound good together and these keys sound good together. And then that's how I got started. And so I was like so addicted to songwriting. I was like writing a song a day and just creating so much music. And it was like, it didn't really matter if I wrote a song I didn't like, because I knew I was going to write another song tomorrow and it'd probably be better. So I think that's a big part of it too. When you're not as prolific, then emotionally you have there's more at stake with each song you write. And inside of that, with each section 100%. You write. So like, this has to be a good verse. This has to be a chorus. This has to be a good melody. But if you're just focusing on writing music as a habit, then it doesn't really matter if you write a bad melody, if you write a bad verse, you write a bad chorus, because you're going to write another song tomorrow or next week, and that could be better. And then, right, if you're doing that a lot, you're going to find some good stuff, some gems, and then you put those together and you release your best stuff. Or you could even release stuff that you don't think is good because someone else might like it, right? I mean,
that's true.
Toto, I don't think they like their song Africa.
Yeah, there's tons of songs like that. I'm pretty sure at least several members of REM don't like Shiny Happy People, and that's top 4 song of theirs, probably 5 maybe. I mean, it's probably one of the more polarizing, because I think some of their fans love it and some hate it.
So yeah, again, I think taking your measuring stick of what's success off of what you think is great to activity. Stop worrying about outcomes and focus on what your activity is, and are you making progress in that regard? Because that's the only thing you can really control, right? You can't really control if you write a great song, like, even though that's what we're talking about. That's what our channels are all about, right? Is, you know, you can technically make a perfect song, but that doesn't mean it's going to necessarily resonate with someone or other people will like it. So I feel like a lot of it is almost discovery. I mean, maybe that's more so for me because I'm not as technically proficient as you are. I don't have all the music theory knowledge, but I guess that's been my experiences. It's more discovering things when you're writing songwriting, at least for myself. And the more digging you do, the more gold you're going to find.
This reminds me of something that Chad talks about too, and I think there's a lot of value in that, in like taking the pressure off and just go. That being said, I think there's also value in taking the time to take what songs have the most potential and really getting those right.
Right. So once you hit on that gold, then once you do find that gold, right, raw gold has to be processed and refined and stuff. So then once you hit on that, right, the writing process is like your rough draft, right? Like when you write a novel, right, they say no editing during the writing process. That's a different side of your brain. So 100%. Just get out the rough draft, just write. Don't worry about spelling errors, grammar. It sounds really cheesy and cliche. Who cares? Just write it, get it all out. And then once you have that raw material, then you can edit it and refine it and make it excellent. And
then something I was going to add too is something you touched on that everybody here or whoever watches this later learn from my mistake or repeated mistakes, I think, which is the longer you go without releasing and the longer that you spend on something, the more pressure it has. So it's kind of like, I don't know, like in sports, if the Chiefs don't win the Super Bowl this year, it's even Chiefs fans, if they're like one and done in the playoffs, will probably be like, well, that's frustrating, but we have 2 rings in the last 4 years. You know what I mean? Like, who cares? But if a team knows that it has a quarterback that is going to retire, right, the next year, so this is Jets. This is the last chance. Or the Jets. The RIP to their season, might I add. I was riding the train. I'm a big I like Aaron Rodgers quite a lot. So I was heartbroken when I saw that, and I knew immediately. I'm like, oh no, I think he's done for the season. And he haven't been to a Super Bowl in forever. And I think they were up in the 1-3. Not remembering, but anyway, they have all the pressure, right? In the way that like Patriots fans, they'll complain, but they're like, we got 6 in the last 20 years. Like we're like, they might complain, but like, anyway, all to say, comparing it back to music, I think there's something good about, even if it's a side project where you don't put any pressure on it, I think would be good. This is a part of why I want to start, I don't know, writing with other people or just having like a side thing that is separate from the music that has all this pressure in my head because it's like mine.
That's one of the fastest ways to grow. That was one of the fastest ways I grew was working with another artist, because you get outside the box, right, of your own thinking, the way you do things. You see another way of doing things, another perspective. You get a whole other approach, and like they probably know some things you don't know, and you learn. So it's like one of the fastest ways to grow is to work with other artists.
Stylistically, right? Stylistically, I think there's something to that too, where it's like, I mean, you can get this other ways, right? But you know, maybe somebody in who's watching that thinks like they've never even thought about starting a song with drums, for instance. But like there might be somebody out there that is like, I start all my songs with drums. Like every single song is I start with a rhythm that I think, ooh, that's an interesting rhythm, and then build from there. And you know, I don't think one is better than the other, but there's something to be said about both, right? And if you don't ever start with drums, I think you're missing out on something. Just because, like, for me at least, that's my best hack to write a catchy song. Is like, because that does not come naturally to me. If I sit at a keyboard or something, like catchy tap your foot kind of stuff does not come naturally to me. I'm more like a ballad, emotional, big sound. And if I do write something catchy, it's usually with electric guitar that's distorted, if ever, unless I start with drums. Drums is like because it forces you, right? If you have a bossa nova beat, you're not
I
going
need to hear your
play
music. I still haven't heard
piano
any of your music.
at you had a whole day to do it, but I was just kidding. But so actually one of the songs I do actually have out there, that song did start, and the drum beat is still super simple. It's a demo, so it's not a fully fleshed thing, but like the whole song is built off of like one. I just made a generic catchy drum beat, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to improvise piano to this. And it forced me to do something that's more catchy, spunky, sarcastic sounding, which evolved into a very sarcastic, very mean song that I think only some people pick up on how mean it is, because it is hiding behind, hiding is not the right word. It's one of those classic, like, sarcastic songs where if you don't pay attention, it just sounds like it's a nice, like, oh, what a happy, nice, whatever. It's like, no. Listen to the lyrics. There's a lot of sarcasm, but anyway, that song wouldn't exist if it wasn't for just starting with a really basic drum beat. It doesn't even have to be an interesting drum beat. So connecting to what you said, like, I think there's stuff like that would come up if you just work with somebody else. Because I'm sure there's a way I've never thought of writing a song or starting a song that if I wrote with somebody else, I'd be like, it didn't even dawn on me to like start with whatever it is you just started with, or something later in the process, right? Where it's just like, you know, I never thought of that way to naturally figure out what the chorus chords should be from the verse chords.
Mm-hmm.
Or I never thought of, I don't know, like some people will do a trick where it's like, oh, take the verse chord progression and just reverse it. You know, if you've never thought of that before, but you are with a songwriter who, you know, you're both struggling with ideas, and they're like, let's just try reversing the chord progression, and it works. You might be like, holy crap, this whole time I could have just been trying that, and who knows, maybe it would have worked. People do that with melodies too, right? They'll take a melody, they'll just literally reverse it, and
one artist I was working with, he's like, I think it was like the one section of my song, like leading into like the final chorus, he's like, what if we just removed like these instruments, and then it like totally like opened up the song and like made it so much better just for, like, that one little section. So it's like I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah, even song sections, right? Like it's really easy to just not use a song section, which is not to say we should use all of them. Like, for example, I've never done a post chorus, I don't think. Just because,
so
part of it doesn't really fit.
Post chorus, is that different than a coda? Because I've always heard like when you double the chorus. Okay,
so a coda is technically just anything that happens at the end of a song, really. Because if you think about it, like coda in music notation, let's take we'll pick on a hymnal.
Yeah, well, the way it was,
hymnal is like the easiest example of what I'm gonna try to say. So, like, you know how sometimes it'll be like literally just for the last time you sing the chorus of the hymn, it's going to end on the one chord, say, instead of some other chord. So literally there'll be a little coda that says, hey, the last time, play this instead. So a coda can be as small as that.
The internet strikes again. Hopefully we get Joseph back here. Any questions at all? If you have any questions, go ahead and drop those. Be sure to answer them. Hopefully we get Joseph back to explain the coda. Yeah, because we're not. Oh, it's coming back. He's coming back.
This isn't frustrating at all. But I did hear you say any questions, but I see there aren't questions. So I guess I don't even remember. Oh, post chorus. So a coda is just really, I would argue, is not a song section at all. It's simply.
And there he goes again. Well, now, I guess we, yeah, hopefully we get him back here soon. But next things we're going to move on to was I was going to walk through how to actually get started producing songs from home. So if you are a
Like a
complete beginner, you
music
don't know where to start. Oh, we got Joseph coming back in. Oh, or not. That was false alarm. Or no, here he is.
Goodness. I feel like we should just shouldn't talk about codas apparently, but anyway, let's try to make this real short. Coda to me is not really a song section. It's just like because it can be anything. A coda can be just like the music that is the outro of the song. It could be a fade out. It could be just one chord that you change at the end of the chorus for the last time you sing it, and then the song's done. So to me, a coda is not really even a song section, really, which is why I have a thing I call a finale, which is like a specific type of coda that I do deem to be a song section. Song sections tend to be opinionated, right? Like choruses have tendencies that make it a chorus.
Then what's a post chorus? Guess we'll never know. So yeah, this is getting a little rough. At least someone's amused. So yeah, we'll see. Hopefully we get Joseph back here. Any questions about that? Any questions that we can answer about
chorus?
all that?
Yeah. So a post chorus.
He said the word post chorus, but
yeah, I said the word post chorus.
Oh, there he is.
Goodness, we're gonna have to.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if you.
Once again, we gotta figure out a way to get past it. But so anyway, post chorus to me is like inherently it comes after the chorus, right? So that's the obvious thing. It belongs to the chorus inherently. So it's I consider it like a chorus after party. To me, is like the real TLDR. It takes the chorus concept and it just kind of is like we want it to last a little longer. It tends to be hook heavy too, so it tends to not be like it tends to not be. I almost consider it like a semi song section where it's like not like you can't have a post chorus without a chorus. You can have a verse without a chorus. You can have a bridge without a chorus, but a post chorus inherently is like an extension of a chorus, and it usually tends to be really hook heavy. To the point that like a lot of post choruses, it's really just it's mostly in pop, right? Like other genres pretty rarely utilize it. Yeah, and in pop, it really is derived from I think EDM, where like EDM had the whole hook or drop or whatever,
right?
Where like
drop.
they have the singing, and then they have the big synth thing that was like
the
real.
Okay, yeah.
Right? I think it kind of derives.
I just always called it the drop. Okay. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Most of my music life has been me doing something and then someone else telling me what I did because I don't know what it's called.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's fine, right? I don't think there's necessarily an issue with that. It's one of those that like actually I'll connect that with a question that I got via email from Steve. I won't read the whole question, but basically he was asking, I would say the question is kind of like, how do you write or make music with limitations would be, I think, the heart
I think
of
you
what
said
his
he had
question
he was handicapped or something. He didn't say what it was.
Yeah. So I think not that like we all have limitations, right? So learning to work within those limitations. One of my favorite examples of this is like Johnny Resnick of the Goo Goo Dolls. I'd say famously, but famously if you're a fan, I think, or a nerd like me. But he came up with different tunings for his he came up with different tunings from his guitar, like with his guitars, because he felt that he wasn't that good of a guitarist, so he couldn't figure out how to do all these interesting voicings because he wasn't that good of a guitarist, according to him. And that creates their distinctive sound to me, is the fact that he wasn't a good enough, so it made tunings, and he got his interesting sounds in his songs from tunings. So his weakness of not being that great of a guitarist, he turned into a strength. I don't think it's always that easy to turn a weakness into a strength, but you certainly can like utilize any weakness you have to your advantage. So whatever the limitation is you're dealing with, Steve, I guess to get back to that question is, try to figure out a way to, do something that almost leverages that limitation. sort of like with the Goo Dolls story. Obviously, without knowing more about the limitation, it's kind of hard to go deeper on that. But yeah.
All right. Well, do we want to transition into our more teaching
Go for it.
sections?
Go for it.
So,
that
sorry,
way, if I die, it'll be okay.
All right.
Because you're talking.
So I was gonna just break down like real quick, big picture, how to get started producing music from home. So if you've just been a songwriter, but you haven't really gotten started with actually writing your own music from home, I was just gonna walk through how you can get started. Real quick though, we got another question from Casey.
It's a good question.
All right, I've seen you guys talk about second verse issues. Let me just remove this from the screen for a second. But lately, the third verse, if there is one, has been tough to keep interesting to me, lyric-wise and arrangement. Any tips to keep the third verse fresh? I guess I'll give what I do, and then you can share what you do. To me, the third verse is almost, and now this again, there's no right or wrong with music. So, in general, when I have it. Every verse I'm trying to change up something a little bit. Right. I mean, just changing the lyrics, singing different lyrics for one thing is a change. But the way I've kind of started to approach third verses when I include them, I don't usually include them because I've been trying to write shorter songs, and I already include a bridge, which makes it longer than a lot of songs. But I've almost seen that third verse is almost like a wild card. I mean, obviously, you want to keep it kind of the same in general, like you have the same general elements as your other verses, and it's the same melody. But a lot of times, I'll maybe like have it really stripped down right before leading into like the big final finale. So it's like the song's been rising in energy, and then it like drops down to like a stripped down, and then boom, it goes back. Or I'll add in a new instrument. Maybe I'll like sing it a little bit differently, like the same melody, but maybe I'll use a different effect or just a different timbre to how I'm singing it or something. So I don't know. I like to just be kind of creative and just try something different. So it sounds the same, but there's something else there that's maybe a little bit more obvious than the change from like a first verse to a second verse, if that makes sense. I don't know what you do. That might be bad, but.
Yeah, no, all of that was really great, and some of it was actually part of what I was going to say. I'll add to what you said. Some of it, I think, stripped down was your wording, but oftentimes the third verse is the smallest verse. So if you think of things in terms of size, usually like your last chorus, biggest part of your song, right? Most instruments, loudest, or the perception of loudness. The vocals probably higher, belted, that kind of thing, right? So usually the third verse is going to be the smallest of your three verses. Another thing is the wording of this has been tough to keep interesting to me. I think a part of it too is I think it's very difficult to have a third verse be interesting without a bridge preceding it. So if you have verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, it's really hard to make that interesting. In fact, a song that I wrote that I really like, it was one of the better songs at the time when I wrote it, like 12 years ago, it was the best song I had ever written. But I think the biggest flaw in it is it's just verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, and there's no bridge. And I think the third verse just feels like, okay, this again. Like it just has a little bit of that, like, we arranged it differently to make it okay, I think. But like, if I were to rewrite the song, I probably would have a bridge before it, or I would get rid of the third verse, something like that. And then also for lyric wise, because you asked about lyric wise, I find that like the tendency is if you, let's take basic song structures. If you have three verses, to me, I like to think of it as a 3-act structure where like the story is in those three verses. Now, if you have a bridge as well, to me, so often, let's say it's verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, most standard song structure. To me, then the bridge is usually concluding your story and the climax of your story. Not the climax of your song, that's your chorus. But choruses tend to be very idea driven and not necessarily story driven. It depends, but a lot of times. In that case, your bridge is the last part of your story, right? Because it's verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, and the chorus is probably not story driven. So in that case, the bridge bears the burden of concluding the story and being the climax. But if you look at story structure, there's resolution after the climax, right? Or, you know, there's after you beat the bad guy, there's a few episodes at the end of the show to be like, and everybody lived happily ever after, or whatever. So when you have verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus, that's an opportunity to have the bridge be just the climax. That's just the moment that you wake up to the fact that you do still love your spouse, or you wake up to the fact that commitment isn't about whether you're happy or not, or you wake up to the, I don't know why I'm picking on that specifically, but like, have the climax of the story be in the bridge, and then that makes it a little more obvious what the last verse is for, which is just that last bit of information concluding the story that can be the after I had this whole like epiphany in the bridge, here's how the story ends. So that's a very long answer to that question. So
Yeah, and then
hopefully between the two of
like,
us, we
I like the stripping it down because like at that point it's getting to be a rather longish song if you have a third verse and a bridge. So like I found it can almost like you almost need a break from the energy of the song. It can get a little grating if it's like the same energy all the way through. You want to need a little break, and then you have your final climax.
Having shorter verses is another thing. Like if you have 4, now lines don't necessarily equate to time, but just if we're going to be overly simplistic, if you have 4-line verses, I think you can get away with 3 easily. If you have 8-line verses, that's when it's time to be like, maybe the second verse and third verse should be 4 lines, and you should split them instead of, because very often, right, in songs they'll have the first verse is twice as long as any other verse. That's very common. That's everywhere. Where like the first verse will be 8 lines. And then some people will even notate it that there's 4 verses. There's verse 1, verse 2, chorus, verse 3, chorus. I don't agree with that analysis, but it's you know, just different ways to analyze the same idea. So that's another thing that you can try is try stripping it down. And then also, like, does a song need a third verse? I do actually really like that structure where you have the bridge, verse, chorus. I think it's a really great way to make your last chorus explode, because connecting to what you're talking about really stripped down, the best way to make a chorus explode is have the part that immediately precedes it be bare bones, right? Because then there's that huge, see where the camera is. There's that like a lot of what creates excitement in music is the difference, right? The gap. So if you have exactly. So if you have a really intimate, it's just you and a piano singing, or you and a guitar, or acoustic guitar singing, and then it immediately goes into a chorus that has like 10 electric guitars and synths and all that. Like that's just a great way or hack to like make it feel huge. Because with music, I find that everything is truly very relative. But like if you have a song connecting to what you were talking about, like if it's relentless the whole time, you kind of just get desensitized to it. A lot of my issue with like thrash metal kind of stuff is, to me, it's almost boring, even though it's like so heavy all the time, just because it's like, but it's just heavy all the time. It's there's no variety. So it just becomes the new standard versus something like, I like Breaking Benjamin a lot. And a part of the reason is they tend to still have those like peaks and valleys.
Right.
They have maybe a creepy verse and then a huge chorus.
Yeah, another cool technique is having, I don't know if there's a term for this, but I call it like an anticlimactic first chorus.
Yes.
Where it's maybe like half the length of a normal chorus, and it's like missing something. It doesn't quite get to the full energy, like expecting it to go higher, but then it doesn't. And you go back to the verse, and then the full chorus comes in with the second chorus, and then of course the third chorus is the full thing. It's kind of cool.
That is a great point. And a lot of times too, the instrumentation will be very different, right? Some will just be sometimes the first chorus will be even smaller than the verse was. Like it gets even more intimate, which then sets up for that second chorus.
So it's like the same melody, but doesn't have all the other elements to build it up. And you sing it differently, obviously.
Yeah. Even like singing it down the octave, which is also common at the end of the song, right? At the end of the song, sometimes there's like the intimate third verse, and then there's the intimate chorus, and then maybe a huge chorus. Like an example that comes to mind is I'm Not All Right by Sanctus Real. I loved Sanctus Real back in the day, but that song, they have the bridge, and the bridge kind of dissipates, and then so there's no third verse, but there could be. The bridge kind of dissipates, and then it's just acoustic, him down the octave singing I'm Not All Right, and then it goes back into the absolutely massive one. which really helps to make it just explode and feel massive, even though it's probably not that much bigger than the other choruses were. But again, the difference is what makes it just absolutely pop.
Awesome. It's a great question.
Yeah, again, a lot of great questions. Or I guess I should say, when we get questions, they're amazing.
Mhm.
I don't know if we could say a lot, but all the questions have been really quite good, actually. So anyway,
Yeah.
you were gonna talk
Yeah.
about getting started with production.
Yeah. So if you have any questions, you can just stop me. So basically, the number one thing you need to get started producing music from home is you need a digital audio workstation. Now this is this could be debatable because other people use other tools. But in general, the tool you want to start arranging your music is a digital audio workstation. So that's a software like Logic Pro or Cubase or Pro Tools or Ableton, all those things.
Or
What do you
Reaper.
use? You use
I use
Reaper?
Reaper. Yeah.
Okay, that's another
Reaper
one
is
of them.
free to use for a long time. If you're just full disclosure, if you're an electronic music person, probably don't use it. But if you're like me and most of what you do is,
Yeah, if you're curious which
not
DAW is the
loop
best,
driven, I guess.
I'll have this this article is linked in the description of this.
Ooh.
But actually, one of my more popular videos is which DAW is the best, and so I was actually interviewing my instructor there, Anthony, who
I'm not
owns
gonna
a
lie,
Pro
I'm
studio.
really curious too. I'm not gonna ask you because
Yeah,
I know
surprising
it's
answer.
in
There's
the
a
video.
surprising
Yeah,
answer.
yeah,
You
I
know it's
know.
surprising because I put it in the title.
Yeah, so I'm guessing it's not Pro Tools because then it wouldn't be surprising.
Yeah, well, I guess you have to watch and see. Then you need the necessary audio equipment, and you can actually get started under $300 with equipment. And so, number one, you'll need an audio interface. So this is like a box that looks like this. So a one a lot of beginners use is the Focusrite Scarlett Solo, and this is the box where you allow your instruments to communicate with your computer. So you can plug your guitar in or your microphone, or if you just have a MIDI keyboard, that's just USB. So, but you need that interface to be able to record audio. So that's how the audio can get transformed into digital content inside your computer. So, this I think it's usually around $100. Then you want a good microphone, and you're probably going to want a condenser microphone if you're going to be recording vocals. If you have to choose between a condenser or a dynamic microphone, it's probably best to go with a condenser. Condensers are more sensitive, so they'll pick up more details of your voice versus a dynamic. Dynamics are good for more recording louder instruments because they can handle a lot more sound pressure. But so if you're recording from home, doing kind of vocals and just recording direct, like through your guitar into your interface, then condenser is a good microphone. And this is actually the one I use. I'm not using it right now because it's more sensitive, but this is it right here. Whoops. I don't know if you can see this. Yeah, okay, kind of see it slightly there.
Yeah.
That's the one on the screen. So yeah, I have my fan on, so this would pick up the fan noise in my room if I was using that. So that's why I'm using this one, which is a dynamic. So yeah, that's a really great one, and I think that's like $70 or something, so pretty affordable. And then just some headphones to hear what you're doing. Right, you don't need to have monitors when you're getting started, but just some headphones. I think these are like $20. And so that's really the only necessary equipment you need to get started. Obviously, you probably want some accessories. Might need some accessories like a mic stand or something. I know this mic, it comes with its own mic stand and its own cables and everything. So if you want to get this microphone, it kind of comes with everything you need to get started. You don't have to buy a bunch of extra stuff. It all comes in the box.
Does it come with a pop filter?
It does.
Nice.
Yeah, it comes with a little metal pop filter.
Yeah.
Then you need to actually schedule time to produce. So, right, that's a big problem, is not having time. So a big way to get around that is just, decide when you're going to do it and you schedule that time. It's also good to have some specific goals you want to set, measurable goals that you want to work towards. So maybe it's finishing a certain number of tracks, or it could even be like writing a certain number of melodies or writing a certain number of chord progressions so that you can actually measure your progress. And then you create that dedicated schedule, so hey, this time of the week or this time of the day I'm going to be working on music. That way you don't just leave it up to whether or not you feel like it, because that's the big difference between An amateur and a professional is the professional does the work even when they don't feel like it.
Yeah.
So stick to your schedule and then prioritize your time. So be mindful of how you spend your time during your scheduled music production sessions. So be sure to focus on the most important tasks and avoid distractions. So that's kind of a big trick, is you can feel like you're being productive when you're not. So if you're spending all your time just listening to random sounds and instead of just like choosing a sound and going with it, or maybe you think you're producing but you're actually on social media, make sure that's not happening, or being distracted and wasting your time. Then also be flexible.
Put your
right?
phone on the other side of the room.
Yes.
Other side of the room.
Turn the internet
especially if
off
it's a big room.
if you need to. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, be flexible, right? Don't beat yourself up if you can't stick to any of this. Any thoughts on these tips so far?
Yeah, no, those are all really important. Specifically, the specific goal. This is unplanned, but people on my side will probably be like, "Huh, I feel like Joseph's talked about that recently, or is about to in a podcast that comes." I don't remember if it's already.
They
come
know
out or
what
not,
you're
but,
about to talk about.
well, no,
Guests are
but
savvy.
yeah, yeah, no, they're psychic. I just don't remember if I already mentioned this recently, but that actually connects to something that I've been talking about recently that I just realized is so helpful. Just because I did it for a while, but I never really talked about it, because sometimes you take for granted the things you do because you don't think it's momentous or anything. But I realized, you know what? There's a lot of power to sitting down and being like, my goal for today is X. To the point that, like, a lot of people I feel like get overwhelmed with producing a song or writing a song, largely because they sit down and they say, I'm going to work on song X, but they have an hour or half an hour. That is not helpful, right? Like, that's like, I'm going to build a house. Okay, you're not going to build a house in an hour, right? And I know those aren't exactly the same. That's a little hyperbole for sure, but I think it's important to be like, my goal is I'm going to figure out the chord progression for this verse or something. Where, like, most of my songwriting sessions are, I'm going to sit and I am literally going to just write lyric after lyric after lyric, testing out a second verse lyric for this specific song. That's a whole songwriting session. And at the end of it, I might have one of the 4 lines where I'm like, okay, that I think is good. So,
Because
like, really narrowing down on like a specific goal, which I think was your first point, huge, massive, highly recommend.
Because we aren't usually consciously aware of this, but we have expectations in our minds when we go to create a song, whether we realize it or not. And if we don't meet those expectations, we're likely to get discouraged. I'm speaking for myself. I can get discouraged.
And then you stop doing it.
I can get frustrated. And I may have actually made progress, but I don't feel like I made progress. So then, and if you keep running into that friction, it's going to be harder to come back and actually improve and keep writing. So having an actual goal that you can meet, and then you can feel successful, you're making progress, and that builds momentum and builds excitement. So you keep coming back to it.
What a tough but good question.
Got a tough but good question here.
Yeah, we have a tough but good question.
I think a lot of these fall in that category. How much time is reasonable to spend on creating/writing a song as a beginner? That's a tough question.
I hate to open every answer with "it depends," but I think that's just as a natural defense for all the people who will hate whatever answer anybody ever gives ever. But I feel like as a beginner, I'll reference Chad again here, because I think he said this, and I tend to agree that I think you said this today as well. But early on, being more concentrated on fast rather than good is probably the way to go. And as you figure out what you think is good, then maybe moving into being a little more picky about what songs you take the time to develop versus not. But how much time is reasonable is like, man, I don't know. I feel like anywhere from a day to a month. Like later, I think, like, there's some songs that took me like 10 years. I wasn't actively working on it for the whole time, but that happens, right? There's some, like, almost any album that comes out, there's a story of like, oh, this is a song I started 10 years ago and finally I finished it last year.
Yeah,
Professional artists have that story all the time.
yeah, I just finished writing a
But
song that I had started like 6-7 years ago. I
yeah,
just finished it like a
sometimes it's
few
life
weeks ago.
experiences. Sometimes it's just you can't get it right at the time, so you got to shelve it, and then later it's like, oh, light bulb. It's kind of the whole, when you are done for work at the end of the day, it's like a well-known thing that sometimes it's just like, if we just go home and come back in the morning, it'll be like, oh, this was easy. So I think that happens when you step away from songs sometimes too, and sometimes
Yeah.
there's like years there. But anyway, as a beginner, I feel like a good goal is don't take more than 1 month on your first song. And some people say that's way too long, and fair play. But I would say that's like the absolute max. Really, for the first song, I would tell people literally make it as easy as possible. Pick a stock chord progression for your first song. Just do a 4-chord song. The whole song is going to be built on that chord progression. Improvise a melody. Good enough is good enough for the first song, just to like get that first song done. That way you have that like, wow, I wrote a song. And that confidence, I think, will build into, because really we're all playing the long game, right? My game is I want to still be a songwriter and be a better songwriter at 40 than I am at 30, and better at 50 than I was at 40. And presumably you're the same for both writing and producing. The goal is to stay in the game. We don't want to be the people who 4 years from now, it's like, hey, remember how I was into songwriting then? Like, that to me is the depressing thing to avoid. So whatever you need to do on the faster side to just stay in the game, to me, is what you should do.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's kind of, it's almost dangerous advice to like say it's okay to shelve a song and move on, because I've done too much of that, and I have so many song pieces that aren't finished. It's like one verse and one chorus and that's it, and then stuff. But if you're I don't think you have to worry about that if you're being intentional with setting your goals and what you're going to work on in each session, which I haven't been in the past, but I'm trying to do now. Is it's okay to shelve a song if it's what you're being intentional, and it's not just because you got stuck and felt like doing something else. Right. Yeah. But if you make the decision, you know what, this isn't working right now, I'm going to do something else. And then, maybe every week you set your goals for the week and say, these are the songs I've worked on. Do I want to try to finish one of these songs, or do I want to try to do something different? And eventually you need to finish music. So make sure you're not dragging that out too long, that you're actually getting songs done. Even if you don't think it's perfect, you're getting a song done, you're releasing it, because music's meant to be shared, and you could have some really great songs that would mean a lot to someone, but they'll never hear it if you don't release it.
Yeah. And there's something to be said too for like, just in general, you can make songwriting easier, but it will never be easy. I think I'm comfortable with that wording, where it's like, even John Mayer talks about, like, I saw a video and I reacted to it, where he talks about how every time he thinks he knows how to write songs now, the next song makes him realize he knows nothing at all. And I think, now obviously that's hyperbole, right? It does get, the more you do it, it gets easier. Certain parts get easier. You get better at, like, for example, I haven't struggled with coming up with an idea for a song in a long time. Like that's the thing that I feel like is just kind of in the past. There's other parts of songwriting that are my new bottleneck, right? My bottleneck right now is writing lyrics quickly. That's my bottleneck, lyric writing. So there's always going to be those things, but I think there's something to be said for just understanding that you can get better, it can get easier, but there's always going to be an element of songwriting that you can't control, where a song just isn't working, where a certain way of writing songs that usually works for you doesn't work this time. That's always going to come up. So just knowing that and embracing that, because I think sometimes there's two kinds of people. There's the people that come with too much of like an engineering mindset, where it's like, oh, for building a house, you just build a house, right? There's rules. You have to have 2x4s here and here, and there's got to be studs every 6 feet or whatever it is. But creative things aren't like that. But they're also not like totally, oh, no rules and no anything. And I find that most people are probably too extreme in either direction, where they're just like, oh, just do it, feels good. And it's like, okay, that's a fine place to start, but you can be more efficient. You can learn to be better if you learn some things. But then the other extreme is also like, well, sorry, there is no one way to write a pre-chorus. You know what I mean? Like, there are hacks to like make it easier, but there is no one way to do anything because it's a creative thing, which unfortunately is just
I think another thing you can be conscious of is getting into flow state. Are you familiar with that concept?
Yes.
So flow state, it's basically it's when your mind, you get into a state of relaxed high performance. So it's when your brain is operating at maximum efficiency. If you've been writing songs or working on music for any length of time, you've probably noticed this yourself. It's like when you don't even notice time passing and stuff seems to come to you easily. The Hungarian American psychologist talks about this in his book and goes more in depth in his book Flow. His name is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, I think is how you pronounce it. So your identity basically disappears from your consciousness, and existence is temporarily suspended, is what it feels like. And you can be just, I've noticed this, like I'll be producing for like 5 hours and I won't even notice. And then so that's what you want to get into. And the way you get into flow state is the task you're doing has to be challenging enough to keep your mind busy, but also has to be easy enough to avoid frustration. So you mentioned, songwriting is never going to be easy, and that's good. You don't want it to be because you want to keep your mind busy. You don't want to get bored with it, but it also has to be easy enough to avoid frustration. So that's something to be aware of, is what is frustrating you, right? Is it something with your DAW where you don't understand what's going on, or you don't understand a tool or something? Is it whatever it is? Identify what's frustrating you and either eliminate it or figure it out. Watch a tutorial and get it. Whatever is slowing you down. Because right now my DAW is just like an extension of me. I don't really notice it anymore when I'm writing. It's just,
it doesn't get in the way. If anything, it helps.
Right.
You probably.
So anything that's getting in your way, you want to get rid of that. But yeah. So make it as easy as possible as you can, but obviously songwriting is never going to be easy, and that's a good thing, because that's why it's a activity that you can get into flow state and really be operating at your mental highest efficiency.
For any former athlete out there, flow state is like the equivalent of being in the zone, but artistically, or with anything mental, I guess.
Speaking of a VeggieTales song,
but like just like when you're in the zone and like it just feels like you're not thinking about making baskets anymore, you're not thinking about throwing the football anymore or shooting the hockey puck, whatever it is, and it just works and you just do the right thing and you're not thinking anymore. Like your brain feels like it got out of the way. Flow state is exactly that, but for creative things or for just any brain work, I guess. It could be for,
also avoiding distractions too, because any distraction, they've shown that it can take up to 20 minutes for you to get back into flow state.
Yes.
So you definitely don't want to get interrupted.
Put your phone across the room. I'll say it again. But it's such a huge thing. And in today's day and age, so many people just don't get it. Like they don't get that, like, it is a big deal if somebody calls you in the middle of your songwriting session. That is a big deal. So like, don't let them by putting your turn your phone off, put it across the room. Because immediately kills flow state often, and then then you're frustrated, right? Instead of being in flow state for 20 minutes longer or whatever it was.
So speaking of that, I have a blog post that actually covers how to write a song in 1 hour, and it covers flow state and some other tips. So I guess to tie a bow on the question of
I'm gonna go there
of how long should it take you to write a song? Maybe if you're a beginner, it's not going to take you 1 hour, but if you're wanting to speed up your workflow and write songs faster, then this article here should help you. And I should put a link to that in the description of this. But I guess I'll get back.
Ooh, you mentioned flow state at the not to get spoilery, but yeah, you mentioned flow state at the beginning.
Yep,
very cool.
That's the number one tip there. So moving on, continuing with the basics of how to get started producing music. Number 4 is to learn basic music theory. I know this will make Joseph happy. So for me, what this means is learning things like what pitch is, scales, intervals, chords, what a key is, time signatures, notation, harmony, form, and rhythm are just like some basic things you need to know. Basically all I needed when I like what really helped me getting started was knowing like just how to create basic chords, just learning how to create a major chord, how to create a minor chord, knowing what all the notes are in a scale or in a key so that I can know, hey, these are the notes that work. And then knowing, yeah, like Joseph talks about, like knowing how to resolve something with the one chord, some basic stuff like that. And Joseph actually has a good guide on this. Can they find it in free guides here?
Yes.
We have your music theory guide. So if you want to like just learn the basics in one good place, Joseph has a good free guide on that. So
Yesh.
Yeah,
The 4 pillars, if you will.
Yeah. Any follow up on this? Also, I recommend this book, Music Theory for Computer Musicians, is good.
Yeah, I would just say, because the pushback, everybody hears music theory, and I think like half of all people don't even know what music theory is, but they're resistant to it. I still don't really know exactly why. I have some theories as to why, but
sounds
for anybody wondering
and boring and hard.
Yeah, like so many people will use the word academic, and I'm like, I feel like you don't know what music theory is then, which is fine, but a lot of people think it's knowing how to read sheet music, and it has literally nothing to do with that. Like I actually would agree, as somebody who can read sheet music, that is totally worthless to songwriting. I totally agree, but music theory is not, and it's one of those things that it comes from. The biggest revolution that happened in my songwriting was the before and after of taking music theory in high school. Like that was the biggest overnight leap, was learning keys, chords, and then chord progressions and keys. That for me was like the biggest. Never again would I sit down and poke out a melody that sounded totally awful. It would never happen again, because I just understand, okay, let me pick a key or a mode or something, and I know the general sound, and I can break outside of that, but at least I know the notes generally I'm sticking with. And that just saves so much.
Oh, the internet strikes again. Real quick, a good hack for this, if you don't know like what are all the notes in a scale or in a key, and you don't want to have to Google every time, like I used to have to go Google, okay, what are all the notes in the key of, A sharp or something. You can actually, if you have your DAW, you can pull up your transposer tool in Logic, or the pitch correction tool. Joseph's trying to come back. There he is. You can use your transposer tool or your pitch corrector tool, and you can select what the scale is of your song, and then it will highlight all the notes, so that right there you can have it in front of you. What are all the notes in that scale? Sorry, I was just trying to fill the silence.
And you can start, always do that. And you can start small, right? Just if you write generally in major keys, just learn C major. If you're a pianist, learn C major to start, and just write songs in that until you're ready to graduate to like, okay, now I'm going to learn G major. So you can start small.
Yeah.
And not like can music theory be overwhelming? Yes. But like the important parts of music theory aren't overwhelming. Like the important parts are really the 4 pillars I talk about in the guide we were talking about. But even that, you can even boil it down to even smaller, where you're like, okay, just C major and G major, because I'm a pianist, or I'm a guitarist, so I'll learn G major and D major, maybe. Probably not F major, because nobody likes playing F major chords, but G major is the most common for guitarists, and C major for pianists, because they're the easiest for each, generally, unless of course you're doing like rock music that is with power chords. Then I guess you would lean towards, depends on the tuning of your guitar. If drop D, then probably D major or minor, and if you do not do drop D, then probably E minor or possibly major. But if you do power chords, any key is kind of equally simple. Just depends on whether you want that last like lowest chord to be your one chord.
Yeah, that's how it was for me when I got started. Like I said before, I knew what any of the notes on the key were, where I just discovered, oh hey, all the white keys sound good together. Oh hey, all the black
C
keys,
major or
all
A
the
minor.
black keys sound good together. So all the songs I was making was, am I going to use the white keys today or the black keys today?
Yeah. That's so funny. It's so funny that like you're the one person in human history whose second key that you really learned and leveraged was C sharp major.
Like, yeah, I didn't even know it was
C sharp major is the key that like most of us ignore. like most people don't even use F sharp major, and even when we get to like B major, it's like it happens. But if you're a pianist, mostly it's a lot of C, assuming it's major, a lot of C major, a lot of G major, some D, a lot of D major, decent amount of A major and E major, and then it like drops off a cliff with like B major and especially C sharp major.
Yeah, I did everything the wrong way, so. But
No, it's just it's so funny. I love it.
yeah,
I love it. It's a good example though of like different ways you can come to a similar helpful knowledge. But there's no one way.
so yeah, speaking of all this, the next step is to learn arrangement. So music arrangement refers to the process of organizing and structuring the different elements of a piece of music, such as like the melody, the harmony, rhythm, instrumentation. So basically just learn the basics of this. So know like basically there's 3 elements that you want to have in every song, right? You're going to have the rhythm section or the harmonic section. So that's like your bass, your chords, your drums, anything like that. Then you're going to have your melody, which, you know, your rhythm is all to support your melody. And then the third element is just, I call it spice. Other people call it ear candy. Other people call it garnish, but stuff like, little like effects or, drum fills, different transition elements, little things here and there, maybe a little like bell sound at a certain point, or if your lyrics mention picking up the phone or someone calling on the phone, you put a little like phone ring in the background or something, stuff like that. I found that right with you might not think you need. I mean, maybe it depends on the type of music, right? If you're making electronic music versus like rock music, but with electronic music, if you don't have, I've noticed if you don't have that, what I call spice, those little elements of garnish in there, that actually you really notice it when it's not there. It just doesn't sound quite finished. So that's arrangement and learning how to do all those different elements is kind of the next step you want to learn, which is mostly what we've been talking about probably during this whole stream. So my top 5 arrangement tips are: number 1, to keep it simple. A lot of times, like a lot of the best melodies I found are pretty simple. I mean, maybe Joseph would disagree because I know he knows some more complex stuff than I know.
I think it just depends, but yeah.
And also just avoiding too many elements, having too many tracks going on, too many different instruments, because an artist I like, Pogo, he makes a lot of music. He's an Australian artist, makes a lot of music taking like samples from Disney movies and such. And I liked how he described this concept was it's like when you're painting, you want to have all those bright, vibrant colors in your painting, or, if you're going for a darker painting, like you want to see all the colors though. If you use too many colors, what happens if you combine too many colors together? You get brown, which is not the most appealing. So it's the same kind of way with music. If you have too many instruments going on, too many different sounds, is what I used to do, because I was just so cool. Like, what else can I add to this? What else can I add to this? Right. And maybe it's also
I'm guilty of that for sure.
It can also be a stem from maybe you feel like something's not right, so you're immediately reaching to add something when maybe you need to take something away. And I'm going to cover mixing in a second, but a lot of times whether or not your mix is going to be successful and sound good depends on your arrangement, because you only have so much frequencies to work with. You have a frequency range, right? The low end of human hearing is 20 hertz and it goes up to 20,000 hertz. And so you want everything to have its own space in the mix. But if you have like 3, 4, 5 elements all competing for the upper range, then it's gonna sound harsh and brittle. And no matter how much EQ you use, it's just not gonna sound quite right. Something's not right, and it's because there's just too much competing for that space. You want to kind of think about that when you're arranging. What's going to be my low end? What's going to be my low mid? My mids, highs. And especially with vocals, right? You want to kind of know those vocals are going to sit in there between like 3K to 6K. It's kind of where the main vocal is going to want to cut through, so don't have anything really filling that space. Or if it does, there's different production techniques you can use, like using like sidechain compression, so that when the vocal comes in, it just compresses that frequency range of whatever instrument is competing. Or again, going back to arrangement, you could just not have that element competing with the vocal. So it's getting a little lost in the weeds there, but Another thing is to vary the texture of the arrangement to help keep the listener engaged and create interest throughout the song. So experiment with different instruments and sounds to create different textures and moods. So that's another thing when we kind of talked about that, is choosing sounds. How do you go about choosing the correct sounds? Well, you want to think about how everything relates to one another and have different textures, because if everything kind of has the same timbre and feel, it can kind of just become a wash, and nothing really stands out. Again, using space effectively, I kind of just talked about that. Use dynamics, meaning, so I have some parts that are louder than others, some parts are quieter. We've been talking about that too. Then experiment with different chord progressions. And a good idea, I've learned a lot just from looking at the chord progressions of songs you love and just seeing what they do. And right, you can't copyright chords, so that's a good place to start, is to just copy the chords, and you might learn a lot. And then you start with copying them, and then you maybe adjust something, you change a chord or you change a few notes, and then as you learn more, you can start to then create your own progressions. Any thoughts on that, Joseph?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a great way to learn. If like just going to some place like ultimateguitar.com or something, just to now verify that it's at least mostly right. But that can be a really good way to be like, huh, I like this song. Let me see what. Just learning to listen to songs to figure out why you like them or what parts of them you really like to then borrow. So like things I've done is I'll listen to a song and I'll be like, huh, that's kind of cool. And I think the drum groove is a part of what drives what I think is cool. So I'll just like kind of copy the general, I'll figure out the tempo, and then I'll figure out the general feel, and then I'll go from there. The song's going to turn out totally different, but I started with the part of the song that I thought, oh, that resonated with me. I haven't done that with chords as much, but certainly at the beginning, that's a great way to go, I think, until you really feel ready to write your own chord progressions. Or if you don't know theory and you, despite my talking about it all the time, you stubbornly are like, no, I don't want to learn any theory ever. Well, that probably is the best bet outside of theory. If somebody said to me, I refuse to learn theory, now what? I would say, stop being stubborn, but do that. That's the way to go. Yeah.
Awesome. So then from there, of course, the next step is learning mixing and mastering. So mixing is just the process of taking everything you've recorded and just making sure everything is balanced well in terms of volume, in terms of frequency. You can hear everything and it sounds good, basically. So Joseph kind of talked about this earlier, that if you're working inside your DAW, basically recording and mixing is almost the same thing, not quite, right? Because if you're used to be like, you had to go to a studio and you're recording actual live instruments, recording guitars and drums and piano, what have you, and just those raw recordings, they're going to sound stale, but they don't have any reverb on them or anything. But now if you're pulling up like a synth or something, they already have like effects already on them and everything's kind of mixed. So that's something to keep in mind, right? Don't just mix because you see someone in a tutorial throwing, hey, this needs EQ or this needs compression, right? Like if you're using a lot of virtual instruments or samples, they might not really need a lot of processing. And right, the more processing you're doing, the more plugins you're adding, the bigger chance you have to actually run into problems and start messing up stuff. But if you're working with all live instruments, then you're probably going to be having to do a lot more processing. And then mastering, that's just like the final step of making everything sure it's up to commercial standards in terms of volume and frequency and stuff. And for both of these, mixing and mastering, it's really good to use references. This is kind of my number one tip, is use a reference track. So find a track that you really like that's kind of in the same genre or has the same kind of instrumentation, and just listen to that versus your song. What does its low end sound like compared to yours? What's its high end sound like? Where's its snare drum like sitting in the mix? How present is it? What the kick drum? Is the kick drum really cutting through? Is it more almost felt rather than heard, right? Different elements like that. And you can start to really learn how to craft a song based on critically listening to your references. And then finally, this is a big one I don't see a lot of people talking about, but it's really important to tune your room, because your room can actually trick your ears when you are mixing. You can think you're hearing one thing, but you're not. For example, with bass, If you can kind of think of the different frequency ranges as a series of balls. So like your high frequencies might be like a super bouncy ball, and you throw that at a wall, it's going to bounce all around your room. That's what high frequencies can do. So a lot of times if you're in a big echoey room, right, you're going to hear more of those high frequencies echo back and reverberate. Then you have your mid frequencies. Those are kind of like a volleyball, like a kind of deflated volleyball. So if you throw that at the wall, it's going to just kind of hit the wall and fall down. So in audio terms, those are your frequencies that are more likely going to be absorbed. Then you have your bass frequencies, right? These are really big waves because they're lower frequency. So the sound wave is not oscillating as fast. So those are really big. And so those are actually going to be like a bowling ball. You throw that at your wall, it's going to punch a hole in the wall. And so that's why, right, if you're next to a car, you're outside a car and it's playing music, or you're outside a building and there's music, you're just going to hear those bass frequencies, because those are what you're hearing is the frequency leaving the room. And so if you are just in a regular bedroom studio and you don't have like proper sound treatment, those bass frequencies are going to be leaving your room. And so when you're mixing, you're thinking, not enough bass. Let me turn up the bass. And then you go and listen on headphones or in your car or somewhere else, like, whoa, it's really muddy. There's too much bass. It's because your ears were fooled by your room. And so if you can't afford to get like, expensive acoustic treatment, right? I don't have acoustic treatment. I also have a bunch of mattresses in my room to help a little bit. But it's good to get some software. IK Multimedia has the ARC system, which is really good, or you can get Sound ID Reference by SonarWorks, which is what you see here. And so what this will do is you get a little microphone, and the software will play these series of noises, and you move the microphone around your room, and it takes a profile of what the EQ curve is of your room, where and you'll probably see, oh, look, there's not a lot of bass. And so then when you turn this on, it's like a plugin. You have it on your master bus or your stereo out, and you listen to your track. It's going to put an EQ curve over everything, so you don't have to turn up the bass. It's going to turn up the bass for you. So when you're mixing, you can make accurate decisions. And of course, when you export your track, you then just turn off the plugin, so you're not getting that coloring your sound. So this is really good to help you produce higher quality music from home, even if you don't have a lot of expensive acoustic treatment set up, and you can be sure that you can trust your ears. So that's a big thing. And then if you can, right, acoustically treat your room, that's, putting up sound panels, bass traps, things like that. And then the last step is just, right, once that you have all that in place, just invest in your education, right? If you can find a mentor, even if that's, buying courses or so on, that can be really helpful. And then lastly, this is the last step. This is usually the first step for people, but investing in better gear and plugins, really, that's really the last thing you want to do, because the budget gear, the budget like plugins that come with your DAW, the stock plugins and stuff, they're actually very good today, very high quality. Same with the budget equipment. So, or a lot of times we make the mistake thinking my music doesn't sound like this artist because they're using all this expensive gear. And you can get like 80% of the way there, which most people won't even notice, right? Most people have like think of like reading levels. Most people have like a 5th grade listening level. When it comes to music, they can't really tell the difference between a lot of music, whether it's like high quality or not. They're more so listening to the arrangement, the songwriting. That's really a lot more important. Yeah. But with all the budget equipment and plugins you have, you can get like 85% of the way to sounding like super professional, which most people can't really tell the difference between. And then you, right, as you learn more, you get better hearing, then you can start to hear the difference between like your music and the professional music. And that's when that's where the gear can get you that extra, 10-15% of the way there to that polished level. But you don't do that until you first learn how to master your own equipment, what you currently have, your own plugins, your own gear, learning all the other stuff, arrangement, mixing, actually getting good at what you're doing. And then finally those extra professional tools can help you get the rest of the way there. And so those are my tips for how to get started producing professional quality music from home.
Pretty great stuff in there. And I had never heard of the room tuning stuff. That is
okay. Yeah, like I said, awesome. A lot of people don't talk about it.
Really cool. Apparently not, because I listened to that space, or I used to, I guess, pay attention to all that stuff a ton. Now I pay attention, I guess, a little bit less to that space. But man, I've never heard of that before, ever.
Yeah, it's insane how many people don't factor in that your room is actually tricking your ears. So that can be so frustrating, right? You're like, what am I doing? I know what I'm doing. I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I was making the right decision. It sounded good in my studio, but I take it out to my car or listen to it on headphones, and it doesn't sound right. And you start going insane. You're like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get this right? Well, it could be your room.
Mixing, if you don't, mixing is a thing that like learning from somebody like you is huge. Just because like I think people think it's way more trivial than it is. Like it's not just setting the volume of things. You could argue that like, you know, compression and EQ are the most important, and those are kind of just controlling the volume, but in a very specific 2 different ways. You can argue that, but like really to mix well, you can't just do it by like, oh, I'm just gonna raise the volume and lower the volume. But really knowing what you're doing with learning EQ, which I know you have videos about, and I'm sure you have. I haven't seen compression videos, but I assume you have tons of those too. But knowing that kind of stuff is just massive. That, and like for anybody with the 80, actually, I'm curious if you agree with this. So it is my impression that if you apply the 80-20 rule to mixing, that would be learn EQ and compression really well, and that's like 80% of the battle.
And and sound balancing the sound.
Oh, sure. I wasn't counting that, but yeah. So plugin.
A lot of people skip that though. They just go immediately to throwing on plugins. So yeah, don't skip that step. Actually, I had that up there for a second. My mixing checklist walks through like step by step what to do when you're mixing. This, if I'd known this when I was going to start, it would have saved me so much time and I would produce a lot higher quality music. But the big thing is not really knowing what to do first, second, third, and so on when you're mixing. So it's really important to have a system because that's going to help you get consistent results, right? If you're constantly like, I'm really excited about my guitars here, so I'm going to go and do those first, right? That's how I would do it. Like, oh, I like this. Let me throw on some plugins on here, right? But that's not how you want to do it. You want to work systematically. And one of the first things, right? It's not the first thing, but one of the first things is getting that just static volume balance. So just putting all your faders at 0 and then bringing it up one at a time. Couple just different ways to do that. Some people say start with the most important first, like your vocals, and you have that set at 0 and you balance everything to that. Other people say start from the bottom up. So I guess you can feel that out and see what you like better. But then that's kind of the first place is just getting that volume balance. And then, then it's EQ and then compression and you go from there. Yeah, that's definitely, I'd say that's like the 80%. That's the 20% that you can do to get 80% of the way to where you want to be.
Yeah, that might even be more like the 64-4, right? The 4% that gets 64% of the results, just because like those are only 3 things, right? And everybody's getting overwhelmed with like reverb and what type of plate reverb versus room reverb versus the cathedral one that's built into my plugin or whatever other options they have in there. So that and like applying 80-20 rule to everything you do, songwriting, mixing, your day job, I don't care, whatever it is just like one of the best.
Yeah, do you want to explain that real quick for people that don't know what the 80-20 rule is?
So the 80-20 rule really came from an economic principle, but at some point people realized it just tended to exist in the world in all kinds of forms.
Yeah, it's also called Pareto's principle.
Yeah.
Right? So Vilfredo Pareto is the economist that discovered it. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah.
Finish.
But yeah, so it's just like the idea that to focus on the economics, it's the idea that like always, if you have a company, 20% of your customers will result in 80% of your income, right? Where like some customers will just think of it like, I don't know, take Star Wars, right? Star Wars, most of the fans will just like go to the movies, and that's the only money Star Wars will ever make off of them. But some of the fans will buy the toys.
20% of them.
20% of them will buy the toys and will buy the, go to the conferences or whatever, and will watch all of the things, not just a movie because it's the big thing. Now, of course, they're losing those 20% of people because Disney sucks, but that's besides the point. But I could not help myself but throw that jab out there.
Right.
But,
and then since then, right, people have kind of discovered it. It can even be even more extreme and be almost like a 64-4 where 4% of your inputs give you 64% 4% of your results.
Yeah, which is really just taking the 20/80 and applying it to the 20 that gave you the 80, right? Because if you think 20% of 20% is 4. So that's where the 4 comes from. And then 80% of 80% is 64. So that's where that comes from. But basically the idea is for almost all things, you can get 80% of the results by learning 20% of the things. You get 20%, 80% of the money from 20% of the customers. You get like 80% of the battle of learning to songwrite better or mix better is learning, 20% of things. And then you can apply
is
that
really
even
exciting.
farther. Yeah.
Because a lot of people can't tell the difference between 80% and 100%. And so all you have to do is focus on that 20% and you're going to get 80% of the way there, which is a passing grade.
Yeah. And even if you do the 64/4, it's really exciting to know you can learn 4% of the things and get over half the results, which to me is like, so what we just talked about, right? EQ and compression and learning how to set volume is probably that 4% that gets you 64% of the results in mixing. So somebody like you can help people cross from the 64% to the 80% to the 90, 95%. But just to prevent overwhelm, start with that. Right. Or with songwriting, I'll pick on music theory specifically. A large part of the reason I talk about the 4 pillars of music theory is, there is an overwhelming amount of music theory. Some of it is super useful. Some of it is useful, but not necessary right away. None of it is necessary, I guess. But and then some of it is like maybe never useful. Like, is it useful to know what a French chord is? I think I remember what notes were in a French chord, but totally worthless. I'll admit that. Totally worthless. It has no value at all.
Don't need to care about
it has a flat 6, a 1, a flat 2, and a 5 or something. I don't know. I forget one of them, but it has a flat 6. I remember that. And it has to be in the bass, I believe. But not important, right? So like for music theory, that's a thing, right? You can get overwhelmed by music theory, but the 4% that gets you 64% of the results is just knowing keys, knowing chords, and then understanding chord progressions. That's most about it. Is it nice to then go farther and learn different types of chords like sus chords and add chords and seventh chords and the different type of seventh chords, and how to use inversions, which we touched on early in the show, or learning to use dyads instead of triads, where you have just 2 notes in the chord instead of 3, which is the standard for major minor chords are all 3-note chords. So learning to use dyads. So there's a ton to learn that is useful, but you can win most of the battle or really make a lot of progress with just a little bit. Goes a long way.
Sometimes I'm laughing because you're using like terms like I don't even know half of the terms. Dyads.
What term?
That means too. Naiads and dryads.
Well, actually, dyad. I'll connect that to something you talked about earlier because I was actually wondering. Because a great way I've found to make chords sound more mysterious is simply to have a dyad instead of a triad, and specifically to have what is
2 notes instead of 3, right?
Correct. So and usually it's not always, but usually not a dyad by definition is just 2 notes instead of 3. Yes, but oftentimes it's in the form of what's called a 5 chord. So if you see like C5, the number 5, not 5 with Roman numerals for all of my music theory friends out there, not that, but C5 like the English 5. So that is just like instead of C E G, it's just C G. And the value of that is it tends to sound more mysterious. And in my experience, a great way to like straddle the line of mysterious where it doesn't feel major or minor is just to remove the third. Because if you think about it, the only difference between a major chord and a minor chord is the third. So if you take the third away, people don't know whether it's major or minor. Now, maybe other context in the song informs their ears, right? Maybe the melody contains the flat 3, so they're like, oh, I know it's minor. But I find that like if you're in a minor key and you want to make it sound less dark or sad, then you can have it be that by doing a dyad. And then if you want a major key to sound a little more melancholy and mysterious and maybe it's not so happy, a dyad can be a great way to go too, because it's more vague, right? So now people don't know if it's really major. So they don't know if it's really
what? The internet's adding some more mystery as we have to ponder what it could have been that Joseph was saying.
I love how every time I can hear you for like 5 seconds after you can't hear me, maybe 10 seconds. I don't know where I cut off, but basically dyads are a good way to like, if you have a minor song and you want to make it sound less sad, minor, use dyads. If you have a major song that you want to sound less happy and a little more mysterious, a dyad can be. Think of it like if there's a spectrum, on one side is minor, on the other side is major. Of course, you can go to diminished and sure, but let's just
So when do you
keep it
use
simple.
naiads and dryads?
Naiads and dry. Is that
Those are tree and river spirits.
okay? That's what I thought. Yeah. From like fantasy stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Chronicles of Narnia.
Oh, okay. I was like,
So I know you had
I think it's Tolkien, but yeah.
some tips you were going to share on how to write songs better. But yeah, speaking of the 80-20 rule, I mean, maybe your tips were going to cover that, but how would you apply like the 80-20 rule to songwriting?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I definitely know music theory wise, and actually that would be a part of my answer. Is like the part of the 20% is probably just the real basics of music theory, because that will help you so much with the music side of songwriting. So if you think of songwriting at the highest level, you write a song, right? But that's not a super helpful way to think of songwriting. Really, you're writing music that needs to be inextricably linked to poetry, essentially, right? You're making a music composition that belongs with a set of poetry, is essentially what a song is. But then even within that, it breaks down a little farther. You have poetry, and then you have melody and harmony, or melody and chords, depending on how you want to look at it. But it's the same thing, essentially. So if you think about it that way, of the three main parts you have in a song, let's be overly simplistic, but largely accurate, where we say we have, do you freeze? No, you didn't. Okay, good.
No.
And if you froze, we all know it would be me freezing. But
still, I was trying to figure out how to make you bigger, but have still me on the screen.
It doesn't matter. Nobody needs that in their life. Self burn. But just if you think about songs in three parts, two of the three parts are music, and therefore anything you can do to significantly level up your music composition skills is going to go a long way, which to me, the start of that is just basic theory. Just as simple as if you're trying to write a melody on a keyboard and you have a chord progression already, if you know, okay, I'm in G major, so the notes I have are G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. F sharp is my one not natural note. Just knowing that is a ton of the battle, because now when you're improvising on the keyboard or whatever, you know the subset of notes that you should generally stick with. So that goes a long way. So the four pillars of music theory is one of the things for sure. On the lyric side, I feel like I don't know if there is a clear 20% to get 80% or 4% to get 64%. Although if I were to say one thing, I would say meter is a big one. And then meter is number one, I think, just because I think I took for granted that everybody knows that lyrics have to have meter. And I think I'm wrong.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that for a long time.
Yeah.
I had to point that out. Like they should all like follow the same pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it needs to be
like
close.
Yeah. Right.
And fit with the melody.
Right.
So I think on the lyrical side, meter is one of those things. Just studying basics of meter, and you don't need to. I think sometimes people get too obsessed with like, oh, what is iambic pentameter? Like, who cares? It doesn't, like, that's a good thing to start with, but it's more important to understand the meter of you. Figure out how to figure out what the meter of your lyrics are, or like what natural meters are. So let's take forever, right? The natural meter in the word forever is forever, right? Small, big, small, compared to unstressed, stressed, unstressed. And any 3-syllable word might be different, right? The first
is that because you have
third
consonants versus vowels, where the vowels are going to be
no, not necessarily.
It's just
not necessarily, but
word.
Yeah, but just like learning to think about how every word has a natural meter.
It's real quick. We got
Savannah
asked, "What's the URL to the 1 hour songwriting guide?" It's actually just a blog post on my blog here. So here's the link for that. And I'll definitely post it in the description here when I get a chance here. And then Alonzo, hey, how's it going? He's a great YouTube channel.
You know somebody
I'm producing.
when you call them by name that is not actually in the that's not even in the
yeah. I
YouTube
did a great interview with him on my channel. He's a great YouTube channel on creating synthwave music.
Also has a super dope logo. Has a sweet logo, man. I like it. It's now much smaller for me, but it's good stuff.
Admire the logo. Yeah, it's really cool.
It's a sweet logo. It's good stuff.
Synthwave Dojo.
Yeah, I don't even do synthwave, but I want to see his channel now. Like that, the logo's so good. I want to go to his channel, even though it's not a genre that I work in. If his content is half as good as that logo, then everybody should be at his channel right now. What are they doing here?
I can definitely vouch. He has very good content.
Yeah, as synthwave as can be. Law. Yeah, even the logo looks really proper
synthwave. Branding. That's a good point there. Branding, right?
It is. That branding is great.
Yeah, my branding is not synthwave because I didn't anticipate being a synthwave brand, but then I started creating synthwave content. That was kind of my most popular content. That's kind of music I made, so then I started doing more of it.
Yeah. Really, I just stole my color scheme from my favorite football team, which is the Broncos, which might blow a few people's minds who, in retrospect, think that's really obvious. But also because I felt like the colors indicated there's a spectrum, right? There's the like super artsy people who are just a little too like, oh, only classical music is good music. And like, I only do math rock. There's those people. Not there's anything wrong with that, but there's those people. That's not me, right? So I think people who are like that can get stuff from what I teach, because I to say the other side is like the people who are all like, just do what feels good, man. And I'm not that either, right? One of the first episodes I talked about was the Christopher Nolan principle of creativity, which basically put my opinion out there that like there's sort of a bell curve. And I think the people who have it right are the people in the middle who understand that at the end of the day, it has to connect with people. Don't make some song that only like music theory nerds are going to like. That you're missing the point there. But I think you're also missing the point if you just completely ignore theory and completely ignore the mechanics of music and you just go by feel. I think you're missing something there too. I think if you have to choose one, maybe that is the better of the two. I don't know. But to me, I think the truth is in the middle. And theoretically, my branding was meant to be like, you know, because if you think about like classical music branding, it's all like black and white, classic. And it's just got that like kind of I'm better than you feel, at least to me, where it's like I feel like I've been insulted by this brand where they think I'm not good enough. So in theory, the color scheme, I hope it does a good job of it, but theoretically, the color scheme is also meant to just be like, hey, I care about theory and care about things with the dark blue, but also the orange is kind of more like, but we have fun too, guys. And I'm not gonna like lose the. I don't know. That's the theory behind it. All to say, Synthwave Dojo, your branding's way better. that's the moral of the story.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and also, yeah, you can support your favorite team. So that's pretty cool too.
Yeah. I think I got one person email me noticing, and I think it was like my mother, or it might have even been my wife, that like 2 years in is like, wait a second. Did you just use the Broncos colors? And I'm like, yep, that is what I did.
Yeah, I've noticed there's quite a bit of snobbery within the music community.
For sure. Which I think some people maybe would accuse me of that, but I really try to be the person in the middle. And I guess it's just your perception of the middle is going to change, right? I had a lot of music major friends who were the type of people who like would get mad that I didn't sing a note classically. It's like, okay, but like this song doesn't fit with classical style, guys. Or like some people said I had a music major friend tell me that to them there's basically two types of music, classical and pop. And I was like, are you joking? Like like I will say that like there's a difference between like music composition and songwriting, right? Because in music composition, it's all about the like nuances of the theory and the chords and all that, because there aren't lyrics generally. And then with a song, it's kind of a hybrid thing, right? The music, it tends to be less composed, less advanced that way, but it compensates for that by adding the wrinkle of, yeah, but it also is poetry. There's a totally different art form combined with it. So, so anyway, but yeah, like I knew people like that, and that I always thought was just, I feel like they missed out on a lot. And everybody has a different position, right?
Yeah,
So
I'm completely the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm like, do things the wrong way and break stuff. And I guess I have a very hedonistic approach to music where it's just like, if it sounds good, do it. So that's kind
yeah,
of what I do.
I mean, there's I've never heard that's I have so many thoughts on that, but I don't think there's anything. It's one of those things where like it depends on what you're going for. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that. I think people get too defensive about what their way is, right? So like I'm sure you get this too, but I'll get like hate comments where like people are just so mad that I say something pretty benign like, hey, music theory is going to help you write music more efficiently and in my opinion better. Like people get upset about that. And to me it's like almost undebatably true. Like it's one of those things where like there's two kinds of people who say music theory isn't important and people who know music theory. Like nobody who learns music theory is like, oh yeah, that doesn't help at all. Never. They will never say that. That doesn't exist because it's absurd. It of course will help. Doesn't mean it's the be all end all, but it will help. But like people get so lost in the like the whole like.
Should we do a hot take segment? What are your hottest
take
takes?
segment? I have so many. So Beyonce has never made a good song. There's my hot take.
Why do you say that?
Why do I say that?
I don't even know.
I feel like Beyonce is the epitome of she's super famous and everybody says she's great, and then nobody actually like. Most of her songs are like nobody know, like everybody knows like what Single Ladies and like 3 other songs.
I don't know any of her songs.
And even
those, I heard one. I was like, oh, I've heard that before, but I don't know any. I don't listen to Beyonce.
And even those, they're just like the epitome of pop. I kind of want to say pop trash because I think that is my opinion, but like it's the epitome of like this is just dance.
What do you think about
music with no substance at all? She's a great singer, but like that doesn't make a great artist. You know what I mean? Like you can be. People so often confuse like different talents, where it's like your songwriting talent, your singing talent have literally no connection. You could be the greatest singer on the planet. That doesn't make you a good songwriter. That doesn't make your songs good. And the opposite is true too, right? You can be a great songwriter and your voice is a liability. So that like they're just totally disparate skill sets.
Right. What other hot takes?
Well, I'm bracing for the like email hate that I'll probably get for saying that I think Beyonce's never done anything good, but
yeah, let's bring on the hate.
Well, you need to give a hot take. I'm gonna get in trouble. Bob Dylan's overrated as crap.
Ooh. I like Bob Dylan.
I don't think he's bad. I just think he's overrated.
He's an inspiration to me because of his voice.
Yeah. Great songwriting is better than terrible voice. I agree with that completely, but I'm also biased towards I care about songwriting more than voices. That and like I feel like
I am so tired of the vocals.
So many people are good singers. I don't think there are so many songwriters.
I can't stand that the stylistic approach to vocals today in pop music. Like it just like
all the runs.
It's like
constant runs instead of just singing the freaking melody.
Yeah, I don't.
Is that what you're talking about?
Just the more or less of the timbre of the voices that people use. That you hear.
Do you have an example?
Pop voice. Just I don't know, like any pop artist. So.
Oh, you gotta give me. I threw Beyonce directly under the bus immediately. I
don't listen to enough pop music, but like I can't think off the top of my head. So yeah, I can't think right now actually off the top of my head, but I feel like if you listen to music today, like if you go just like listen to like the pop music, everyone kind of sounds the same. It's like overly
produced.
like breaking like their voice too much. It's like almost whiny, I feel like. Versus like I feel like there's a lot more variety in the voices and vocal styles if you go back to like the 70s and 80s.
Yeah. I do agree. I don't know that I would call him a. I struggle with great songwriter.
So
I
why
feel
do you
like I
say
need
he's
to
not
look
a
into
great
Dylan more. No, I'm not
songwriter?
saying he's not a great songwriter. I'm saying I don't feel like I know his discography well enough to make an argument. I know it well enough to feel good about saying overrated, but that, in my defense / in my, like, it's not really that hot of a take, I would argue that by nature, anybody who's one of the most highly rated anything is by nature overrated. Because, like, if Bob Dylan is not a top 5 songwriter of all time that's ever been on the planet, then he's overrated. Because I think most people would rate him as a top 5 ever. So by nature, if anybody would ever, it's kind of like the
So
Beatles, right?
he's not top five.
Beatles are universally considered like the greatest band ever. So if you think they are anything less than #1 ever and not by a wide margin, then you would agree with me that they're overrated. But like by definition, they're overrated, right? If you think they're anything but the best, but the world generally considers them the best, then like they're overrated. That doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they're overrated, which I also think the Beatles are. Just in general, almost anybody at the top is going to be overrated. But which again doesn't mean they're bad. It just means like, yeah, of course they're going to be overrated. This is true of the greatest basketball players, the greatest football. Like, it's almost always going to be true. But yeah, so I'm not saying he's not a great songwriter. I'm saying that I think the jury's, I think he's overrated, and the jury is out for me.
So
personally,
just because of the sheer amount of praise he gets, you're saying that it's not quite.
Yeah, and the songs I've heard, I'm like, well, I don't know if it deserves the like unanimous. He's one of the goats. I don't know. I think it's just one of those things where, like, in music especially, groupthink really takes hold. I think we talked about this privately, but my thing with the Beatles, or maybe I talked about this with Chad in our live stream, I don't really remember, but I think a part of it is just like it's very difficult to not. So a lot of people will like, well, I'll
Right,
use
the Beatles were a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah, they were a cultural phenomenon, and then like so many people
music, so,
will take the premise that they say, oh, this is the best band ever, and then insert that into the song. So when they hear a song like I Am the Walrus or whatever it's called, or Yellow Submarine, they take the premise that they already accept that they're brilliant, great songwriters, and everything they do is great. And it's very hard to just take the song for what it is. And actually, the reason I hate It Depends and Beyonce's It Depends. Yeah, so It Depends is actually kind of like a software engineering thing where like it's just a joke that we say it depends to everything, but it also is because it's true, but I like it.
Send you some diapers.
Beyonce is overrated. But so with the Beatles thing, it's just like it's very hard, I think, for people to not be like, they accept the premise the Beatles are brilliant, and then they see everything through that lens. I will never watch that movie about the one guy who, like, everybody in the world forgot the Beatles existed except him, and he like knows their songs, so they think he wrote the songs, and he just becomes like famous overnight because the Beatles songs are so great. Completely reject. Absurd premise. The idea that the Beatles became famous because their songs were just that amazing, and then some random guy in England, I think it is, if he just was the only one who knew Beatles songs, played them, he would be all the late TV shows in like 3 weeks or whatever it is. Absolutely absurd. Absolutely absurd. Would never happen. And it is absurd on its face if people think like, oh, it's just the songs that like made the Beatles what they are. Like that would never happen.
The milieu was important. But speaking of being imperfect, like one of the lessons when I was in audio engineering school was we actually listened to the actual stems for Here Comes the Sun. So the actual like raw recordings, and you could listen to each individual track.
Yeah.
And you hear like people talking in the background, you hear noises. It's like it sounds like a home recording. So it shows like that's, I mean, that's
we're very
forgiving
of music. That's very forgiving.
Yeah, because they didn't have the equipment, like the budget
even
equipment
the pitch
we have today is
even the pitch. I mean, there are some Beatles songs where I am like borderline appalled. They are like so flat, or like one person singing is so flat, and it's like, what on earth?
And I think there's a hunger for that's coming back as people are wanting the more raw, more real, not so mechanical on the grid type music. So that goes kind of full circle to talking about how do you know when your take is good enough. I think part of that is also just having a deadline. And once the deadline has passed, then you're done. The take is good. You move on.
Difficult to do, but I think it's a good idea. Also, I feel the need to counterbalance my negative hot takes with the positive one. So I'm gonna give a positive hot take. Let me get the word right. Crap, I forgot the word. Oh, John Denver is one of the most distinctive songwriters of all time.
Just because his last name is Denver?
No, distinctive meaning like his songs. Like I think a lot of artists have a lot of artists that sound like them. I would argue that John Denver's songwriting is like I
haven't listened enough.
Is the epitome of his songs sound like nature. And you could vaguely say he's a folk artist, and I think that's true-ish, but it's like he doesn't sound like any other folk, right? You would not listen to a normal folk song and then a John Denver song and be like, yeah, it's the same. And even the songs of his that sound like, for example, Take Me Home Country Roads, people are like, oh, that's a country song. It is. He didn't write that song, or he was one of the writers or something. Most of his music doesn't sound like that. Like Rocky Mountain High or even songs like Annie's Song. I mean, he just like captures nature in song in a way that I don't think anybody has been able to do. And then I said distinctive, not necessarily great, although I think he's a great songwriter, but I'm deeply biased. He's like the first songwriter that inspired me that I wanted to be a songwriter. But and I do think he's great. But I think just I don't know. I just have never heard an artist where I'm like, that sounds anything like a typical John Denver song. Whereas like even artists I love Breaking Benjamin, but like there are lots of artists that sound kind of like Breaking Benjamin. 3 Days Grace or something, or Vertical Horizon, probably the same thing, although I think there are fewer artists that sound like Vertical Horizon. I guess it depends how deep you go. But like John Denver, I feel like he's extremely distinctive as a song. His songwriting voice is so him that I would never confuse it with anything else.
All right.
Is my positive.
Now, what are you holding back? What's the really hot take that you're too afraid to share?
The hot take I'm too afraid to share? I don't know. I opened with the Beyonce one.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
That, and I give two negatives. I feel like if anything, I need to give another positive. I'm trying to think. I'm usually a hot take machine. So
what do you think about Max Martin?
I don't even know who.
Do you know about Max Martin?
No.
He's like responsible for writing like all the hit songs over the last like 20 years. I mean, all of them is an exaggeration, but like Britney Spears, Taylor Swift, like all the biggest pop stars, he like is one of the main writers.
I don't know. I don't know that I have a hot take. Outside of like
the only people who have more #1 hit songs than him are like the Beatles. Those are the only ones that have more.
I guess the closest, I agree with who I presume to be your wife based on the name.
I don't know this person.
Yeah. I agree. We should hit on that. But I guess a hot take off of what you said is like, I feel like one of the biggest misconceptions is people conflate good and popular. And I just think like, man, that's not true for anything. Now, I heard a theory that I actually think is brilliant that I hadn't heard before, which was basically that when an art form is at its peak, the popular stuff and the good stuff are the same. But any other time other than the peak, that's not true. So like so in the golden age of movies, the movies that won all the awards and the movies that were the most successful and popular were the same. But like then we moved into eras where like what was critically acclaimed or what was like artsy or whatever, or what was good, which are not necessarily all the same, and what was popular were not the same. And I would argue like I think that's true for everything, and certainly for music is true. I mean, anytime somebody thinks, oh, good because popular, just look at the top 10 and ask yourself, is that really good? Even good, right? Like some of it, there are elements of it that might be good. Like the production is probably amazing, right? They have $1 million productions, so they better be. And the singing might be amazing, right? Usually pop stars do have their skill stack is very good singers, usually good dancers, and good looking. That's kind of the skill stack of the pop star. Not necessarily, writing or a lot of.
And then their music's just played everywhere, so then your brain becomes familiarized with it and comfortable with it, and your brain kind of gets tricked into liking it. Yeah, which is, I mean, like even what's the most popular hamburger? McDonald's.
nobody would say it's the best, right? Nobody would say that. But then for like art stuff, people do say that. Like, oh, the latest MCU movie was the biggest. I mean, obviously not the latest one, but MCU movie X was like the biggest movie of the year. I think even most people have the good sense of not conflating that with being the best. Because I think most people know deep down, no matter how much you like the MCU, that probably at no time was any MCU movie the best movie of the year. Probably.
Yeah.
Maybe
I
there
mean,
were
today,
some good ones in there, but
today so
and
much of
today,
art is what's considered popular, what is determined to be what's held up as the standard is really, I mean, that's the hot take there. If we want to, I don't know if we want to go in that direction, but
really
it's basically what is determined. What's good is a lot of it comes down to really just identity politics and the the secular religion that's kind of infected everything.
Nobody should ever see art through the lens of politics or like you get. In theory, we should be able to have a discussion on the merits of art that is completely agnostic of whether you agree with the worldview that it may or may not have. That should be completely separate. Otherwise, it's just propaganda, right? Like literally, if art is just meant to teach you or like to change that's literally propaganda. There's no difference between propaganda and what you're calling art at that point. That and like I don't know. It's just the difficult thing, right? Is it's so hard to have this discussion without people getting upset about because two things can be true. It can be true that like I think it's obvious to all of us who are thinking people that of course there's some level of objectivity to how good something is, some level of it. The reason we know that is because we all know that I have a 6-month-old daughter, right? You have several. So let's pick your 3-year-old or something. If she scratches something with a crayon, you know that you can't hand that to somebody and be like, this is as good as Van Gogh. It's not. And we all know that. But then people will be like, art is all subjective. If art is all subjective, then you can't even have a discussion about if I scribble on a piece of paper in 3 seconds, you cannot deny that it's just as good as Van Gogh because you said it's all subjective. So everything is meaningless. Why are we even talking about it? That and like, why would you learn from somebody like you or I? Because it's all meaningless anyway. You might as well just hit random keyboard notes and be like, that's my song.
And you're getting into nihilism
because I say it. Yeah. So like, it's one of those things where like deep down, I think we all know, of course, there's some objectivity to it. Now, that doesn't mean that it's easy to see the objectivity and nobody is the keeper of that, right? Like I don't pretend like, oh, I know what's objectively good and what's not. No, I think it's a difficult conversation, but I think it's a conversation we can have about what are the objective merits of an art. So like, I think the problem is people get too extreme about it. Is it difficult to determine how good a song is or how good a movie is? Yeah. It's not a trivial thing, right? To have a conversation about like what is the best superhero movie ever? Is it The Dark Knight? Or I mean, it's The Dark Knight, obviously, but like, you know, you can have conversations like that.
Is that objectively true?
I would argue from a pure movie storytelling, etc. standpoint, I want to say it would be difficult to argue against it. I feel like number 2 is Spider-Man 2, which is most of the people who would argue against The Dark Knight would argue it's not a comic book movie. It's just a great movie that happens to be dressed up as Batman, which I think is a fair argument. It's kind of like the discussion of there's a difference between a great movie that is Star Wars and a great Star Wars movie, right? Like for example, you could have a great movie that's dressed up as Star Wars. Like if Christopher Nolan made a Star Wars movie, he might do things that like break canon and don't really fit into the lore very well. And it would make me, as a Star Wars fan, very unhappy, even though I'm a big Nolan fanboy and I love Nolan. He's far from perfect, but he does a lot of, most of his movies are hits as far as I'm concerned. So like, it's kind of like that, right? I feel like the best superhero movie might be Spider-Man 2, but the best movie that is a superhero movie, I would argue, is The Dark Knight. And I feel like it's not close. I mean, the plot line is brilliantly done. The villains are brilliantly, I mean, GOAT of villains in superhero movies, I would argue by a pretty wide margin, probably. Bale's Batman is great. The story is great. I could hear that maybe it's a little overly long. I don't know. We probably shouldn't get too deep into this. But anyway, long story short, I just feel like it's one of those things that
People
we
could probably say that
all
about this
know
live
deep
stream.
down. Yeah. We all know deep down that there's objectivity to this. And I just think it's unproductive when people like cover their ears and like, no, it's all subjective. Like, that's not true. I know
Do you
deep down
think
you know
that
that's not true.
do you think that plays into the idea of some people seem to have that in order to be good at music, you have, or any kind of art form, you have to have a certain level of talent, which you don't see with other professions. For example, you wouldn't say,
Yeah.
I want to be a doctor. Well, you
Yeah.
think you have enough talent to be a doctor?
Mhm.
No, you'd say, well, you just got to put in the time and the effort to go to medical school for 6 years or whatever, and then, go and practice and, learn medicine. But people don't seem to have the same perspective with any kind of art form, whether it's music or writing or painting or
Yeah.
whatever. It's like you have to have talent. And you hear people say, well, I'm not an artist, or I can't draw, or I don't
Which
have
is
a
disheartening to people.
musical bone in my body. Like, is that really true? Because
Yeah.
for me, I was like I wouldn't say anti music, but I didn't have anything to do with music growing for a long time. I didn't start making music at all until I was 18.
Yeah.
And that's because I had bad experiences in school with music
Sure.
classes, which don't have to go down that road. But yeah, I didn't think I had any talent, didn't do anything with music, still don't play an instrument. I'd like to learn an instrument, but I don't have the time to do that. But didn't really do anything musical until I was 18. And then when I did start doing stuff, it was awful for years. And I just kept doing it. And now I'm at a point where I'm at least passable, have a passing grade.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah,
So
I think that's a part of
wrap
it.
this up, because we probably
That's
wrap
true.
it up.
But before we go, you need to give your positive hot take. I'm not letting you off the hook of that. But I think it comes from a couple different things, and I spend more time than I probably should thinking about this because I care about the I like thinking about the deeper things of how people work or whatever. So this is probably a total waste of time, but also because I hear it a lot. And if I were to take all the hate I've ever gotten, probably 90% of it is some version of people saying that, like, oh, it's all subjective. What do you know? Blah, blah, blah. Or or anti-music theory, which I think kind of fits into the same realm. But I think it comes from a couple things. One is the great irony, right? Is people always will accuse you of being arrogant if you say that you think that there is some objectivity here. That doesn't mean it's easy. That doesn't mean I have the answers, but like there clearly is some objectivity, even if it's difficult to find it. I think people get upset about that because I think everybody wants to think the music I like is good or the movies I like are good. The problem is that that's very, for any of us to say, that's very arrogant, right? So I think we need to start with admitting that what we like and what is good may not be one and the same, right? There are artists that I like that I don't necessarily think are good by the way that I would measure how good an artist is, but I like them, and that should be fine, right? There's movies I enjoy that I don't pretend they're good movies, but I enjoy them. That's fine. So I think a part of it is like an ego.
Candy has some merit.
Yeah.
Right, you wouldn't want to eat it all the time, but it has some merit. But
yeah, and you can like candy.
Yeah.
I've never thought of that analogy, but that's a really good one.
Right, but most of the time you want to sustain yourself on actual good, rich, healthy food. But
and also there's like an argument for like what makes a food objectively good, right? Mm-hmm. Is it the protein amount, how long it satiates you versus the calories? You can have different discussions on that too, but that doesn't mean there's no objectivity, right? It's objectively true an egg is better for you than a brownie.
Scientific community has been going back and forth for decades at this point.
Oh, about eggs. Yeah.
Oh, eggs, butter.
Yeah.
Dairy.
I've come to the conclusion that nutrition science is just a giant
The food
pyramid is such
because that was
amazing anybody ever believed that one.
Well, it's because it was bought and paid for by the mega food corporations. So of course, right, that's the problem with you have people buying off the politicians and whatnot.
Yeah. So anyway, that's as a great analogy, right? For the idea that I think that's a part of it, people's ego and unwilling or unable to separate. Like we should be able to have a conversation about what I like versus the artistic merit. So, how I feel about a certain artist personally and how I would actually rate them, I should be able to separate those two. I think a lot of people don't want to. They just want to affirm that what they like is good, and they don't like the idea that somebody could have a discussion saying what they like isn't good. And I get that too, right? Because there's some people that like take joy in being like, the thing you like sucks, right? And I get that. That's jerky, right? And I'm not gonna lie that sometimes I might get a drive out of that, just for like really overrated. Yeah, I mean, with overrated artists, I think I take a joy. I don't take joy in that though for the people that like them. I take joy in that just because like it just feels to me that most of these things that I say are obvious and most people actually agree with them, but they're too afraid to say, why does everybody love Beyonce or claim to love Beyonce?
That's a great thing too.
Anti-Nickelback, right? Nickelback is an artist that everybody like. Everybody
apparently Imagine Dragons are now the new Nickelback. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I could see that. Well, except that like people admit they like
some of
people admit that though. The whole thing with Nickelback is they're a huge band that everybody denies liking, right? So they're lying.
Yeah, it's like nobody goes to that restaurant because it's too crowded, you know?
Yeah. Now Beyonce, I think, has the streaming numbers and stuff, so it's not a perfect opposite. But Beyonce is that artist that like everybody claims to love, but I don't think like I've never met a real Beyonce fan. Do those even exist? I'm sure they do. And also, how many fans she has is irrelevant to whether it's good or not, which connects back to the earlier point. But anyway, long story short, I think part of it is like people get their ego in the wrong place where it's like we should all, myself included, I like movies. I like shows. I like things that I know aren't good. That's okay. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like everything you like doesn't have to be objectively good. And another thing is it is difficult, right? It's difficult to have a conversation about what makes something good because you and I might talk about a movie or a song, and we're looking for different things, right? The way I measure a song might be different than yours. That doesn't mean that one of ours is more valid than the other, but like there's something to be said for, and I think this is another thing, not to bring Chad up again, but from our conversation together, me and Chad, he mentioned, I think something about the idea that like, depending on the genre, you would measure things differently. And I agree with that, right? Like for a dance song, you wouldn't measure it based on the lyrics. I would actually argue the best way to a better dance song is to maybe even have no lyrics. Don't even bother with it. Because that's not the point of the song, right? The point of the song is just something for people to dance to. So the way I measure that is going to be different than something that is a Bob Dylan song where it's the lyrics are everything, right? It's clearly not any of the other stuff because I mean it's Bob Dylan singing, right? So the lyrics better be good because it's not about anything but the lyrics. I mean that's maybe slightly overstated, but you know. And then you take like John Mayer, right? The guitar work is going to be an important part of what he does. So if you think his guitar work sucks, then maybe somebody would argue he's bad or whatever. The point is like I think it's a difficult conversation to talk about how good something is. That doesn't mean it's not one worth having just because it can help us for ourselves to write something that is better for ourselves, because of course there's something objective in here. That doesn't mean it's easy to find. But I think it's just a more productive way to live too. As a creator, knowing that like, because if all songs are created equal, then like, why would you ever spend more than 20 minutes on a song? Why? But again, people do spend more than 20 minutes on a song because they know down deep that it's not true that all songs are created equal. Like if I just take a stock chord progression and go with the first melody that works and write the first lyrics that work, we all know that 99 times out of 100, that song will be worse than one that I take time for. That doesn't mean it won't be more popular, right? That might be the big hit where I'm like, really? I wrote that in 20 minutes as a joke. That was meant to be a joke. You guys took that seriously? So that might be the case, but that doesn't mean that it's still not objectively worse than the other song. But anyway, your positive hot take.
A positive hot take, I guess I'll go back to what I was saying earlier, is you don't need any talent to be a successful musician, producer, songwriter.
Ooh.
You can
qualifies as a hot take just because you said any. I'll give it to you.
It doesn't take any because I didn't have any when I got started, so you don't need any. And hopefully, I'm doing at least a passing grade, I think now. So, yeah, especially I mean,
talent is overrated for sure.
Even getting into like if you're wanting to like make a career out of it, if you're wanting to make a living from music, you also don't need talent to do that. With everything being decentralized today, right? You don't have to be like Beyonce to be successful. There's so many indie artists. because you don't, the whole 1,000 true fans principle, right? If you get 1,000 diehard fans for your music and they each, you know, spend $100 with you over the course of a year, that's $100,000 a year. So there's now everything's, you can go right to your audience. You can build what many people consider a very small audience and make a really good income, especially when you apply modern digital marketing tactics and concepts. And but even if not that, right, if you want to make an income as a producer, like producing other people or mixing other people, or an arranger writing songs for people, that's all possible. And I don't think you really need any talent. It just takes that drive. It takes wanting it enough and actually loving it enough that you can't not do it. If you can't, that's what it really, I think, comes down to is it something you can't not do? If so, then you don't have to really worry about talent. Maybe that determines your ceiling, but the floor is going to be high enough that you can have a really good career, I think, if you want to.
Yeah. Talent is more of an accelerator, I think, than a determiner of fate. It's definitely not a determiner of fate. I agree. I've actually said before, I don't know if you said it because you've heard me say it, I don't know, but I've also talked about the ceiling thing. The ceiling I totally agree with. Like there is a truth to that, right? Like I'm 5'7".
Right. Yeah. You might not be.
I never would have made the NBA. Right.
Right.
It just was not. My ceiling was probably high school basketball at a small school, maybe.
Right. You might not like blow up like Justin Bieber on YouTube and become a pop star, but also why would you want to do that? Like you can get by with, right? You can live in obscurity and make a multiple 6-figure income, and that's from your music, you know?
Yeah.
So,
and I would argue, like, if you're aiming at financial success with your music, you're probably missing. And I love personal finances. If I were to create another YouTube channel, it probably would be on like so I love that stuff, right? So I'm not an anti-money guy. I'm not your typical artsy like
right. I just mean like
that guy.
I think that's the ultimate dream, is being able to support yourself, make a living off your music. You don't have to be distracted by other things. That's all.
Yeah,
I meant by that. And money is a magnifier, right? The more, it just makes you more of who you are. So
yeah. But off of that, like, it's worth knowing what you said is completely true, but also like don't exclusively aim for that, because I think some people miss out when they're like, "Oh, how do I just want to write a hit song?" It's like, whoa, you're missing the point.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying.
How do I write a better song? Yeah. How do I write a song that my audience will like? Is maybe even fair enough. But sometimes people end up missing, I think, when they start to go too far into the whole like. It's kind of like I notice whenever somebody walks up to me and says, "Oh, I wish I played the piano." That's always how they word it. They never say, "I wish I had stuck with the lessons the way you did for 10 years so that I could play the piano." They never say that. And I'm not saying they need to say it in that many words, but I notice nobody ever says, "I wish I had stuck with my piano lessons." They say, "I wish I knew how to play the piano." Like, yeah, I wish I knew how to speak Spanish and French and all of the languages, but I'm not willing to put the time in to learn those things. So like, of course, everybody wants to know everything. I want to know how to be a great photographer. I want to know how to be a great video. I want to, if I could just magically be great at anything, I would want to. But I think sometimes people do the same thing, unfortunately, with like music, where they see it as like a way to get famous or a way to, instead of being like, no, you got to love the craft for itself, which is how you end up doing well. I don't know if I accept your premise that you have no talent. I don't know you well enough, but I doubt that that's true. I'm sure you have talent. It just was dormant.
How do you define talent then? Oh, and he freezes right at that moment. All right, hopefully we can get him back here. Any questions at all? Any questions at all? Go ahead and post those below in the comments. Hopefully we can get Joseph back here to wrap things up.
Anti-music for a while.
I heard him. There he is.
Back.
You're back.
Yeah. I was going to say, we can conclude right after this, but to answer your question, I think it's just like your natural acumen for a thing, right? So talent is, if you have two people and they've never played soccer before, which one will A, be better immediately, is one part of it, and the other part is
frozen again. Yeah, what are your thoughts? Comment below. Do you think you need talent to be good at music, or do you think talent is overrated and not necessary? Curious to know what you think. Or how would you even define talent? How do you define talent? What does talent mean? And Joseph is really frozen this time. Hopefully we get him back. Just a reminder, by the way, there's a bunch of good resources in the description below.
Which one, given the same amount of training and the same type of...
There we go. I'm back for a second. And I felt like the streaming platform was like trying to get all his words in at once. And then freeze again. But anyway, like I was saying, there's a bunch of good resources in the description to some free guides that Joseph has and that I have on helping you write better lyrics, write better songs, mixing checklists. So definitely check those out. All right, looks like he's rejoining. Are you there? Oh, he's both of them are frozen? Both? Which one? Okay, which one is this? Oops, that's the wrong one. All right, there you are.
Goodness. Clearly we got to wrap up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess just to me is that combination of like, it's roughly a combo of like your ceiling, how good you are immediately, and how quickly you accelerate given the same circumstance.
Yeah, I was very bad right away, and it took me a long time to accelerate. So by that definition, I was not talented.
There's a difference between not very talented and not have any talent, though. I don't know. I think I agree with your whole statement.
Yeah, I guess I'm probably being a little hyperbolic, but the point is
that
people use that as an excuse, and maybe that's not even what they really believe. Maybe what they're really saying is, I don't want to put in the work, like you kind of talk about. So they say I'm not talented enough. What they really mean is they don't want to put in the work, which is fine.
Yeah.
It's just good if we can be honest with ourselves and acknowledge what the real problem is. But yeah, I think if you love it enough and you keep at it long enough, that you can achieve a pretty high level of reach a pretty high level of achievement.
Agreed. Perspiration underrated.
Mm-hmm.
Inspiration and or talent overrated.
And plus, I mean,
that doesn't help.
Yeah, and plus, I guess building on that, just with my worldview, I believe that we're all created in the image of God, and God's the most creative being there is. Building the universe, galaxies, and everything, and so we all have creativity. I think is inherent to every human being, and some people just cultivate it more than others. And maybe you don't have a desire to cultivate it. Probably no one listening to this, everyone here is creative, but other people maybe are more drawn to numbers or engineering or whatever. But even those people, I would say, still are creative, still have a level of creativity.
For sure. Agreed. What a great note to end on. Amen.
All right.
I guess we're done.
Amen.
But as a last thing, just for everybody, anybody who somehow is still here, we'll try to keep it shorter.
We have 5 people still here.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
Kudos to them. But in the future, I would love, and I'm sure Reagan would love as well, some feedback on what you want the future to look like, especially if there's certain guests you want. I'd like to get this to be something where it's called an open mic for a reason. And the reason for open mic is I want it to be an open mic. Now, whether that be the fact that like we're constantly inviting other songwriting, music kind of YouTubers on, or just other people, right? Or whether that be stuff like you want us to listen to your song and give thoughts or feedback on the production / the songwriting.
That'd be cool.
Another idea that we tossed around was, this might be hard to pull off, but I assume we're both curious as to how you all feel about wanting to see it, but something where like maybe we try to sort of write a song together on stream or make some progress on a song. And then in that case, you guys could be a part of like putting ideas in the chat.
Also,
a whole bunch of different things that
roasting each other's music. You could roast my
yeah.
songwriting. I could roast your production.
Yeah. Yeah, we could do that. I don't know if that's the what we want to cultivate. I feel like
Critiquing,
yeah,
yeah,
I feel
pleasant,
like I'm
respectful
constantly trying
critiques.
to fight the like. I don't know if it's just the hate comments, but sometimes I feel like, do I have a perception of being like the negative guy? Because I try to be in the middle, where like, because it drives me crazy when people are like, oh, everybody's the winner, blah blah blah. Like we all know that's not true. Come on, get out of here. And you need, my favorite coach was the tough coach, right? That's the coach that gets the best out of you. But also like I don't
I
know. It's
wouldn't.
just one of those things. I
I just don't
don't
pay
go too
attention
deep
to
into.
negative comments because, right, the vast
I mean, most
majority
of them
they don't
are
represent
just hate.
the vast majority of
That's
people.
true. That's true. For every hate comment I get like
I
30 very
find
nice
hate
emails.
comments to be comic relief.
Most of the time they are. Half the time they're not. It's like, did you even listen to
I'm
what I
kind of
said?
disappointed we didn't get any hate comments. So guys, I expect you to do better next time.
Yeah. Yeah. Bring the hate next time. Say how our faces look weird and Joseph's opinions are stupid and terrible. And actually, I got a comment like that today. Somebody was like, sorry, buddy, you're not a professional songwriter. And
Yeah.
I had a snarky response I almost gave, and I'm like, no, I've been nice in my comments and even been generous
Jim,
to those that are mean. I'll keep it up.
you're too kind. We're expecting some hate. Says
Yeah.
came in late, but great
Yeah.
discussion.
Apparently, he didn't
Mixing-
listen to the directions. I thought they
Yeah.
were very clear. You're
Mixing
supposed to
rock.
say that we're stupid and ugly. Okay. That's what you're supposed to come in with.
Yeah. Mixing raw takes me out right now. So that comment resonated. Great. That's awesome. Writing a song while streaming would be great. So yeah, I briefly looked into this. There's like a DAW we can get where apparently we can collaborate remotely. So that'd be interesting.
That could be another thing too. If it doesn't work live, we could try a thing, which maybe we should discuss this off air. But as the last thing, it could be a thing too where we like video back.
Be
and
sure
forth, like
not to subscribe to our YouTube channels because we do not want to get famous.
Yes. Well,
anyway,
actually, that's true. Famous is it feels like I would never want to not be able to go into a grocery store, which none of us would ever get to that point from these channels because we're not even like YouTubers. We're music teaching people on YouTube. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I'm gonna take that and make a quote and post it on social media. We're music making teaching people.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think our niche could even hit 1 million subs. Like, I literally think our channels is not possible to hit 1 million, at least in the next 5 years or so. I'm basing this off.
Yeah, there's probably not enough people. Yeah, I was joking. I just meant.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I just turned into a serious thing. But you all must be sick.
Always being critical, always taking everything seriously.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, most comments don't get to me. It's just like, I think it's those things where like, there's some truth to it, but it's not necessarily what you want to be. I think that's one of the things. Because like I know there's a part of me but what people don't know is I'm like way more critical with me than, and I'm never critical when somebody like sends stuff. I always try to be nice about it, but honest. That's the key. You gotta be honest, but not don't be like a Gordon Ramsay or a Simon Cowell. You know what I mean? That's just like, it's an entertaining. I love Mr. Wonderful and Shock.
That's a shocking thing. That was what was shocking to me. I never watched Gordon Ramsay until like a year ago. I watched, I think it was Kitchen of Nightmares, or was it a different show where he would go and take over restaurants and fix them.
Yeah. Oh,
I was shocked to realize, like, you think he's this hateful guy. I watched like, wait a minute, he's actually super kind. You just see the
I'm sure
out of context clips.
Yeah.
But a lot of times the people he's dealing with are like insane, and they're not getting it through their heads, and they're doing dangerous things that are bad for people. I think that's a whole other topic, is that our culture, we don't understand what love is.
Yeah.
Right. We think
it's not just letting people do whatever they want.
Yeah, let people do what they want. But love actually is willing the good of someone, actually doing what's best for them, which might not be what they want.
Yeah. My daughter, who is about to learn to crawl better, might want to crawl down the stairs, but I know that she's not capable and she will get hurt. Just as like a real extreme example of like,
don't let her near the stairs.
Yeah,
breaking her
obviously
heart. Child abuse.
I know. I'm the worst, trying to keep my daughter, who I love so incredibly deeply, from being hurt, and that I'm the paranoid dad that if she's ever not in our room, I compulsively check on her and sneak her back into our room, into her playpen, because I am that guy. But yes, I'll say I love my daughter and nobody cares. So thank you all for joining us tonight. This was fun, Reagan, which I knew it would be. Because lives in general are fun. I had a ton of fun with Chad in our live stream, and hopefully Chad will be willing to join us at some point. I know he's definitely somebody that I would love to join us. Hopefully he wants to join us as well. But
any feedback, leave in the comments. If you're watching the replay and you made it to this part, you are amazing. You deserve some kind of trophy. Something.
Yeah.
So,
also, anyway, maybe you should spend more time on songwriting and producing and less time listening to us if you spent that much time.
Anyway, leave any comments, feedback, even if you watch the replay, and suggestions for future episodes here.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks for watching, and see you around.
See ya.